Alrighty. Make sure we're live here really quick on my channel. Okay, it says that we're live. Stream health seems good. So, all right, welcome everybody. I'm here today with Perspective Philosophy. He is
Hello.
another vegan YouTuber, as well as a philosophy-oriented type channel. He's talked about a lot of different subjects that we won't actually. I don't think you've ever talked about antinatalism, have you? I was looking through the
No,
channel.
it's been requested. It's been requested though, so it's definitely of interest to my audience. So it's one of the reasons why I came on here.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So welcome. I mean, we were talking about this beforehand. Like, this is definitely one of the most interesting topics you think you could possibly give anybody. Basically, I mean, this is it's really
I
nothing.
think definitely important. I
Right.
think like when we talk about like the overall consequences of either of choosing to act either way, I think it's profound. So
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think there's something that we could even be talking about that would be more deserving of that word. So, anyways. The title of the debate is just is having children selfish, and I think we're going to stay mostly focused on that, with the exception of maybe talking about a couple things as we go along. For possibly like future discussions, future debates. But um, so yeah, so obviously my position is I'm the anti-natalist. I am. I actually really do think that I'm not just playing devil's advocate here. Obviously, I don't see any courts of unborn children. I don't hear them. They aren't. They're not asking to be born. They're not asking to not be born. And I think everyone else can pretty much concede that.
yeah,
So it's up to the person whether or not they bring them into existence in the first place. So it'd be a selfish act to bring them into existence because it's
well,
up to their self, right? It's not up to the children because we can't hear the children.
so is something inherently selfish if there's no consent given?
Well, I would say uh, that we're talking about if we're talking about not coming into existence in the first place. So yeah, I mean, if we're talking about the beings that uh,
Do you
don't
think that
exist, right? Like, they can't give us any consent at all. They can't say anything about it. So obviously, it would be
yeah,
100% up to the people making the
yeah.
decision whether or not they brought them into existence. It'd be a selfish act.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But when we mean selfish, what we mean is self-orientated, typically, not just that it was like for every action, every decision we'll make obviously originates from an agent, and that means a single unified, consciousness. So we would say that, every action would be selfish in that respect. But what we mean by selfish typically is that something is done uh, to value an individual by themselves, typically. So I would say that we act in order to perpetrate the value of one.
It's both. I
Um,
would say it's
you
both.
think it's both? Okay.
Yes.
So you would say that we couldn't, for example, let's say we knew that our child. Do you think we could act in the interests of an unborn child, or would you say that would be nonsensical?
I think it's totally nonsensical. I think it's impossible because for a number of reasons. But namely, one, we sort of discussed this before we went live. I asked you if you thought that your future progeny curing cancer would be a valid reason to bring them into existence, and you thought that that would, right?
Yeah, I think that's fair, a fair. I think obviously, like we did say, like you'd have to have knowledge of that, and I think the knowledge of that would be impossible. Obviously, predicting the future.
Right.
But if you could be certain
Right.
that your future progeny were to cure cancer, then yeah, I would say that would be a pretty worthy reason to bring a child into the world.
Okay. Well, so if we just take a little bit of the arithmetic behind this. Like, let's just think about it. Let's try to think about it, okay? Because obviously
Mhm.
we can't know what that would happen or whatever, but let's just try to think about it. So if
Yeah.
you advocate for that child coming into existence,
Yeah.
and you bring them into existence to cure cancer, right?
Hmm.
So down the line of future progeny, right, we have over about 2,000 years. That's
Hmm.
about what, like a million progeny, based
Yeah.
on the averages of if you produce like two children each.
Yeah.
Okay, so if each one produces two children, which is the average for people that reproduce. So after about 2,000 years, that's about a million progeny that will all by prevention, if you didn't bring them into existence, all the cancer for them would be prevented. So 100% of the cancer would be prevented for them, plus all of the other ailments, right? They'll never
Yeah.
suffer poverty. They'll never suffer murder or being a murderer or causing murder or whatever it may be.
Of course, there's the opposite that would be implied in that they would never feel joy, wonder,
Sure.
excitement.
Yes, and
Yeah.
we can. I would love to address those things with you as well.
Yeah.
Uh,
I guess like just one quick question before we go like too far down the track. It's just when you said that we couldn't act in the interests of an unborn child,
mhm.
it seems a bit strange that we can act in the interests of an unborn child when we are preventing their suffering, but we cannot act in the interests of an unborn child when we are trying to facilitate their pleasure. So could you elaborate?
Yes. Well, okay, so facilitating their pleasure would mean that this is my way of coming at this. There's a lot of different ways of coming at this. Another philosopher named David Benatar has other ways of coming at this. I come at this from a perspective of just can you name the well-being that is not derived from a pain? Okay.
Hmm.
So just like,
Um,
can you name the love or the joy or the happiness or the whatever that isn't derived ultimately from a pain? So, for
Well,
example,
I think
love.
I think that sounds like what Plato says in Gorgias when he says, "Would we agree that to desire is to suffer?" And then like
Hmm.
Callices says, "Yes." Like we'll agree that to hunger is to suffer, to thirst is to suffer, and that
Hmm.
pleasure is ultimately the relief of that suffering, and is an instance of pleasure which, in combination with that suffering, annihilates the suffering and the pleasure simultaneously, so that both, once the desire is facilitated, the pleasure occurs, so does the pain, and they're annihilated at a single moment. But then we could say that to continue to desire onwards would then reinstigate the pain. And then to end that pain, we would have pleasure. So like it seems that there is a constant relationship between pain and pleasure, and I would say that's subjectivity itself. I think to understand either of them independently would be a bit nonsensical. I would say that the way that we would understand pain and pleasure in the first place are metaphysical distinctions within like the phenomenological environment in which we are. So we would say that um, my experience is made up of qualitative like interactions with the world, and some are good and some are bad. I would say that the way we understand good and bad is reference to various aspects of having felt good and having felt bad, and that what it actually is a constant relation between experiences that lets us characterize them as such, because otherwise they are just formless.
Right. So you think it's a subjective thing that comes from your feelings, right? This
No, well,
more or
it's
less.
not.
I mean,
I mean, like what we would derive as happiness or something like that, that I wouldn't say would be subjective. But
mhm.
I would say that what we derive as having positive or negative phenomenological experience, I would say that those experiences are non-cognitive, but exist. I would say what I'm really distinguishing here is the fact that metaphysically they are both interdependent for their form. Otherwise, it wouldn't be good or bad because there'd be nothing to characterize it against.
Right. Oh, well, I suppose we should have prefaced this with the axiom. We sort of missed it for the first 10 minutes. So, I mean, the axiom for the debate. I was going to ask you: would you agree to the axiom for that causing pain is bad and preventing pain is good? That's very important. Like causing pain is bad and preventing pain is good. If you don't understand what I mean by that, just go ahead and ask about the axiom.
Absolutely. As I choke.
Hmm.
Yeah, I wouldn't
Okay.
necessarily. One
Okay.
thing I would say is that, like, I don't think that we can derive axioms ourselves. I think that's somewhat nonsensical. I think that I don't think I can just assume what is good or bad. Um, Second, I would say that,
I have another one for you then.
well, I was just going to elaborate. Like,
Go ahead.
it depends on what we mean. Like, I do think that we should seek good and, avoid bad. But what we mean by good and bad, like let's say pain and pleasure, I think that suffering is itself not inherently bad. For example, if suffering itself gives distinction to pleasure, then a certain amount of suffering would be necessary to have a positive experience, and that positive experience is by definition better than than a negative experience, and no than a neutral experience because it holds greater value. Then we would want to have a life that has suffering, but in the lowest possible amounts, we would say.
Okay, well, I'll ask you for another. Since you don't want to agree with that axiom, that's fine.
Mm,
I actually would say that there are numerable other axioms that we could find eventually. You'll agree with one of them. Uh,
right.
would you say that there is a fact of being required or indispensable just by existing, like for a being? Like, so for example, would you say that um, there is a need to breathe air instead of breathing water for humans?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'd say that characteristically, like what depend like I wouldn't deny something like the material or anything like that, and I would say that like where desires are dependent upon or contingent upon certain objects necessarily, like for example oxygen,
Mm-hmm.
water, things like that. These, like, we cannot help but to desire certain, like reliefs from pain, for example. I would say like that would be a typical one. Also, we probably, yeah, I would say that probably the most biologically inherent desires. So I would say that's something that was purely non-cognitive, natural in origin, purely natural in origin rather, is probably an escape from pain, and a relief mechanism.
Okay. Well, okay. Well, yeah. I mean, so look, that's all I'm saying is that when you come into existence, you exist in a a requisite format. Like you're not doing something that is just you're not doing something that's independent of breathing air. You know what I mean? There's not something you're doing that is non-cognitive or um, subjective about whether or not you can breathe air, as opposed to breathing water. You know?
No, but I mean the ways in which we feel it would be a non-cognitive, like
Yeah, yeah.
emotional state, like a mental state, wouldn't it?
Eh,
It wouldn't be a cognitive. Like, I don't think about drinking water and then feel that my thirst is gone.
Well,
Like,
well,
I'd feel the thirst being relieved, and my body responding to that, and that would be a mental stimuli in my head, wouldn't it? It would be a it would be a reaction. It would be something that happens to me rather than something that I can force happen, like through conceptualizing or something like that.
um, yeah, yeah. You can't. Yeah, it's not something you choose, right? It's
Yeah,
not. Yeah.
yeah.
So
It's like a
like,
non-cognitive value.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So sure, we could call it that. So like, I just think that we exist in this state of requisites, necessity or fundamental, just basic need,
Hmm.
and that we didn't choose at all. And
Hmm.
why would we impose that need onto beings that aren't asking for that need to be imposed on them? Why would we cause that uh,
But the beings are that
imposition?
need.
Well, yeah. I
Like,
mean,
that's like, I mean, like, it's not like we are, like, if you were to ask them to not be themselves, that would be like, that would be nonsensical.
well,
So
no.
even if they did, even if I know what you're saying, there's no courts of unborn children, and
Yeah,
so it's
that's
yeah,
nonsensical, right? Like saying
yeah,
that
yeah.
they
I
have a
agree. I
choice.
agree. I agree, but it would be nonsensical to say that there was a choice to say that they could be something other than what they are. And if you're saying what we have to ask is whether it is better to be or not to be, you know
Hmm.
what I mean? And
Well,
in
it's
which
not
case,
just
well,
that. It's I'm not just asking whether it's better to be or not to be. I'm asking whether it's okay to impose a state of need of necessity on someone else, where they have no other options other than to abide by the rules that are, quite frankly, going to kill them eventually. And so, why would we, do that?
See, this is the thing. I don't think I necessarily imposed. I don't think you could be saying that you imposed a state of necessity upon someone else. I think that you could say that you created a life, and that by definition has a state of necessity towards it, and that desire exists within that
But,
life.
well, no, because you do have to answer what gives you the right to bring them into existence, right? Because they aren't. There's no courts of unborn children. Like there's no. They're not asking to be born. They're not asking to not be born. But it's up to yourself. It's up to you. It's a selfish thing. I think it's inherently selfish because of what I just explained. Because and bottom line is there's a state of necessity that they will have to deal with, of death and you would say suffering as well too, right? Like they are guaranteed to experience suffering because they're guaranteed to die,
Yeah,
right?
they're definitely absolutely guaranteed to suffer. Yeah.
Yeah. So look, I mean, so why would we? I'm just saying, what gives us the right to do that?
Well, the whole point is like I suppose of what I would respond is that just because they're going to suffer doesn't mean that that life wasn't valuable or that it wasn't a good thing. That's what I would ask is whether you think the good life was impossible, because if the good life is possible and we were to bring them into a world in which they would live a positive life and a good life, would that not be better for them? Well, I mean, it wouldn't be worse than, it couldn't be better than not existing, because that's I guess what they would say, like, would it be better to exist or not to exist? It's quite a difficult question, because when we're saying, like, would it be better to be in a state of having never existed and a state of, even of bliss? Well, we can't compare the two, because one isn't comparing a neutral state to a positive state. It's comparing zero and one. That, like, one is a quantity and one isn't.
Right. So this is where the value for, like, would you want to prevent cancer from happening, right? Like, if you could prevent the cancer from taking place, you hold that value, right?
Well, yeah, but I would say that when I would say, like, preventing cancer is good, yeah, it would be good to reduce the pains of cancer, but that necessarily, like, getting cancer does not necessarily make your life, like, it most likely will make your life worse, don't get me wrong, but, like, how we approach suffering has existential importance to the value of our existence. So in the words of Sartre, the disabled man disables himself. So when he says that, what he means is that when, let's say you were made like a paraplegic, it would be better to walk, we might say. But let's say that being made a paraplegic, for whatever reason, got you out of a gang. You now approach life with a new, like, vigor and zest, and then you become a disabled rights activist and end up, living a life of meaning and value. Whereas before you were on a life of perpetual self-destruction. We could say that that necessarily didn't harm you, but helped you. But we would not say that being a paraplegic is a good thing. So we would say that it's not about just the physical phenomena that we experience, like, sorry, the physical, like, material reality in which we experience, but also how we approach it.
Right. So would you say that, I mean, I hear what you're saying there, but to boil it down a little bit farther, would you say that, like, accepting $1,000 for a pinprick would be you would do that, right? Would you say that's analogous with what you were saying, basically? Like, would you accept $1,000 for a pinprick? Like, would you accept becoming a paraplegic, I guess is what you were kind of saying, is so that you could, like, get out of a gang and get your ass in gear and, like, make sure you make something good happen for the world, you know what I mean? So
yeah, so, like, it would be a ratio between good and bad, like,
right.
of value.
But would you say that that's analogous with this? I mean, to, like, just to, like, bring it down a little bit. Like, I mean, would you accept $1,000
it's analogous,
for a
but
pinprick?
I think it's analogous. I would say that I think the point that I was trying to make though would be that like it's and I think an even like more clear example maybe even be like a vaccine. Like you take a pinprick to avoid something like polio. That seems like a fair trade, doesn't it? And and I
So
would say
so
yeah, like it seems to make sense. Like it's a value transaction, but
this
it's
actually,
not.
what I'm saying here is that this isn't analogous with actually like prevention. So the action of stopping something from happening or arising in the
Mhm.
mechanism of just not bringing them into existence in the first place via not being born. Right. So
Yeah, but
like,
but I thought you said that it wasn't like, for example, if
well,
I can't
it's
act,
analogous with what you're claiming, but all I'm
yeah.
saying is that it's not analogous with whether or not preventing the unborn from being born and thus preventing all of their suffering. It's not analogous with that because it would be more akin to claiming rather than saying for example, uh, is um, what we the analogy we just explained, like is the pinprick acceptable for $1,000? It would be more analogous with, well, the $1,000 is totally prevented. Would you accept a pinprick for $1,000 if you didn't even need the $1,000 to begin with?
Mm. Well, I guess the point I'd make is that the analogy breaks down when we look at it like this. Like one, you said that we could not act on the interests of a being positively. So I just don't see how we could act in the interests of a being negatively if we were to assume that was the case.
Well,
So
through the mechanism of prevention, right? So
okay,
like,
but then we would also then have to say that we were preventing all the possible pleasures that they could achieve
yes,
and the
yes,
and the goods that they would have. So if they
yes.
were to live a good life, then by preventing their existence, we would be doing harm.
But
But like
we explained earlier with the
but
analogy of the math.
we can't do harm to them because they don't exist. So what we are doing harm is to our idea of them. So what we are saying is that in this decision making process, we are juggling between choices of good and bad, and that in one case it's got to win out. So what we've got to work out is whether that someone will live a better life or a worse life if we bring them into the world, and whether that would be a selfish choice, and whether the world would be a better place.
Well,
Would you not agree?
well, the example I gave earlier was just if you had a child that cured cancer, if based on just the averages of two people being born from each person, I mean, over the next 2,000 years just alone, we're not talking about till whenever so for however long it takes really for humanity and animals to go extinct, really at the end of the day, is what we would be really going to. But if we're just going to take into account 2,000 years, that'd be about 1 million people that will be never suffer cancer through just prevention, through the mechanism of the action not stop it being stopped through it
Okay,
not
that
happening or arising, right? And then
but
they would also have every other suffering prevented for them as well, not just
but
cancer.
also every other pleasure and good, and
Yeah,
what
sure.
we have to
So
say.
if we
So
discuss those, yeah, great. Yeah, so let's discuss those things now. So like love, for example. Okay,
mhm.
if we're going to talk about love, I'm sure most people in here would agree that love is a well-being that they may or may not have experienced over the course of their lives, right? I would characterize love as more of I think that it's like identical because all it means is the word deep affection with the word addiction. If you just look up the word addiction, find a definition of the word addiction, I mean, it's feeling in a state of deprivation uh, for the love to occur, right? It's a state of dependence, right, on somebody else, whether it's the love of your mother or the love of your girlfriend or the love of your whatever it may be. I mean, it's a state of you'd be in a pain state if you got deprived of that thing. So it's not the well-being that is not derived from a pain because of this. It's actually just a well-being that is alleviating a pain in some instances, and then in other instances, it's actually just causing colossally more pain. For example, if people love eating animal products, which is I'm sure something you advocate against on your channel. I was watching a lot of your the stuff on your
Mhm.
channel. I mean, there's people that advocate for eating animal products and claim that they love meat, they love dairy, they love eggs. So is this a love that we want to get behind? You know what I mean? So obviously, and this would
Yeah.
be prevented 100% by just those beings not coming into existence. Any of your future
Um,
progeny that could nullify your veganism, along with
oh,
cause cancer and poverty.
continue to exemplify it and form, structures of disciplinary structures which ultimately change society. And actually, by not producing more vegans, we might ultimately be reducing the likelihood that veganism will be propagated throughout society. So there's also the opposite that could be argued. But like, I'm not
Well,
here
no,
to argue that.
no,
But
no.
like
It's not
the
the
I guess the point
opposite.
I guess the point in which I was trying to like I'm trying to exemplify first, I would say that when we look at something like love, I think that I do like the analogy that it's an addiction. I think that's quite
Yeah, I mean, well, look,
it's quite nice. It's quite a
can you
nice
make it
analogy. And
not analogous with addiction? I mean, try your best.
well, I think that first, like, it depends on the kind of love that we're expressing. Like, what do we mean by love?
Well,
And do we
love,
mean appreciation
yeah, it's
of,
true.
or like, like, are we appreciating an individual or for themselves, or are we using them extrinsically as a means to an end? So, in many respects, I think like a love for meat is actually a love for the satisfaction one would obtain when they eat the product. For example, if I was to say I love, no, sorry, it's like my dog.
Sorry about that. She was
Oh,
just
it's all
looking
right.
at the mailman.
Oh, my dog hates postmen. Yeah, like so. What I would say is that there is like when we say like a love for any extrinsic value actually is a derivative of a love for self, and is a form of selfishness, self prioritizing. I mean, not that that's a bad thing, but it could be like a self benevolence, for example. Like I love to be hydrated because it is a part of my well being. That kind of expression, and we would say
Sure,
that's
but
self
even that,
derived.
but even what you just said
Um,
there, it's actually a form of addiction as well.
yeah,
So
I mean,
like
yeah,
you
but
have no
right, but
option
then
whether or not you are satiated by water, as opposed to being satiated by sulfuric acid or something. You know what I mean?
yeah,
So
fair, that's fair. But then I would say that a love for another would be characteristic of caring about their well-being in respect of your own. So you'd be saying that their well-being is of equal value to your own well-being, in which case it's not a self-orientated or a selfish desire. And like
well, we're sort of talking about something different now. I mean, this is
oh
after the fact of like,
no,
whether or not it's selfish or not, right? Like to be
well,
blunt.
I think it matters. I think it matters because I think when we look at, for example, the drive to love another, I think that to have something like an innate drive to have an empathetic response to another, I don't think I would characterize any of those things as love. I would say love is actually a cognitive experience just as much as it is a non-cognitive, in the sense that the value that we feel about being in someone's presence and then the deprivation, that sounds like an addiction. That sounds like being away from someone simply causes me suffering, so I wish to be with them.
Do you
That's not an
think?
appreciate. That's
So,
not an appreciation of their value cognitively. What I would say that a cognitive appreciation of their value is that it may cause me pain to be away from them, but I will accept that anyway because it will bring them something good. So you could love someone so much that you would let them go, for example. In which case, we're talking about a different value relationship with the world. And I think that when we look at what desire is an outward, what I would characterize desire. If you tell me if you think that this definition is adequate, I would say an action urging process, and that this action urging process is always aimed at an object of our experience. An object of our experience, by definition, must be separate from us. And the characteristically addictive side of things is the fact that we desire something material, and then once we obtain it, it's no longer objective. It is owned by us. We have gave it metaphysically the the notion of property. So I would say that this cup is now mine. I cannot desire to have this cup because the cup is already part of myself in a metaphysical sense. So
can I just
I
respond to what
cannot
you said a
keep
minute
going
ago?
for it.
Okay, so what you said a minute ago is you said that since you can love someone so much that you would let them go. I would not characterize that as being a love for them, and I think a lot of other people wouldn't characterize that as being a love. I mean, pretty obviously, like we're not talking about deep affection for someone, if which is the definition of the word love. If we're talking about you know, I mean, look, I guess you could kind of make this into some sort of context. I still don't think that it's not a dependence of some kind, right? Like you're depending on the action of letting them go. It might be for your own self gratification in some way, shape, or form. I think actually it probably would be, right? Like you're just letting them go to, I don't know, find another person, make them jealous or something like that, or who knows for what reason they're doing it. But at the end of the day, I think that it's, no matter what, it's a dependence. It's something you could be deprived of, right? And the other person could definitely be deprived of it, right? So it's not a well-being that isn't derived from a pain. There's still a pain occurring. There's still something being deprived somewhere. Something is being deprived here. And it's not just a well-being by itself, right? Like you wouldn't be loving this person, know what I mean?
I think when you say that, like I would say that metaphysically, like pain and pleasure cannot be seen independently. I think that you can't have a life of absolute suffering and having never felt pleasure. Just as I think you could never have a life of absolute pleasure and having never felt pain, because that wouldn't make any sense, because it is the distinction between objects which give them.
I do think you can have a life of just fucking pain. I think there's plenty of examples of that, actually. I think there's plenty of examples of things where people...
I think you could point to examples of people having a greater amount of pain, but I don't think you could point to an example of someone having only being able to experience pain ever.
Okay, if we're talking about the specific instances, though, I think there are instances where you can't claim that there's some sort of well-being taking place, that there's some sort of alleviation of the pain taking place. Like, for example, like a burn victim that gets all of their senses melted off. I mean, you really think that person is experiencing some form of, well-being there?
Well, I would say, I mean, like, what do you mean by I mean, we can dive into that analogy in a second and see if they weren't feeling any pain, for example, would that be like a form of pleasure? Well, I would say that if you're talking about that senses being removed, then they have lost a part of their experience, and they're not having a pain or a pleasure in relation to the feeling of on their skin. They've lost that. And then if you say that would be a negative,
let's use the example of Dax Cohort. Okay, this man lost about half of his hearing. He actually changed his name from Donald Cohort to Dax Cohort. And he changed his name to that because he couldn't even hear his full name being called to him anymore. He wanted to die very badly for about 3 years, and they forced him to stay alive on his deathbed, and he wasn't allowed the right to kill himself. So, I mean, would you grant this man, like, the right to die? Right? Like, I mean, obviously, I don't think that there's a well-being occurring here, and you think that there's some form of well-being occurring for this man.
Well, I think there's a few things. I mean, when we talk about euthanasia, I think it's a little bit more complex than just like, would I allow someone to die because they feel pain? I think that...
Look, I just don't think that we should be imposing anything on that person because they didn't even have a choice to come into existence in the first place. So why wouldn't we just give them the right to die if they wanted to die? If we can't even give them the option whether or not they want to come into existence or not, why wouldn't we give them the option whether they could die or not?
Well, I think there's a few things that we'll have to consider, and I think that was probably being considered when we were, by the legislators involved with this guy. First, that if his suicide wouldn't have been independent, I'm assuming, so that it would have been assisted. So we would have been asking somebody to assist him to kill him, which is a separate act. And then also
you could press the button yourself too, that kills you with the machine.
But I mean, it's still assisted suicide, and it's also. It
really what it is at the end of the day. It's
of what we would characterize someone having being able to make the choice to rationally end their own lives. And we'd also, so for example, if we were to say that this person is experiencing something like a great amount of depression, that their rationality was compromised, that maybe that they were being unable to make a rational decision of whether this would actually benefit them more than it may harm them. The narrative of their lives was not as fulfilling as it could have been. They could have went on and lived better life, or they could cut it short. And
Look,
um,
it's still the person making the decision to end their own life. They can press the damn button if they want to, or they could ask somebody else to press the button if they want to. It's you're claiming that it's still assisted.
but it's
Uh,
yeah, but I mean, I would say that it is still assisted suicide, and again, it affects more than one individual because it's
it's just
legislation. Like,
it's like the
so
only
like
way. I think it's the only way that you could even have something that's remotely acceptable based on just anything that's called civilization. I mean,
what like
whether or not you're being civil or not, like if you're like this isn't something that should be in question. I think everyone should just be able to leave if they want to leave, whenever the fuck they want to leave, because they didn't have any option. They had no option whether or not they were born
But
in the
it's whether
first
that
place.
being like, for example, but we would characterize a lot of people who are, and there is something, there is questions to be asked here, like whether we are mischaracterizing people as mad or not, and so on. But when we look at people who are going to kill, like want to kill
Why do we
themselves,
need?
like typically we would say that a lot of them have a like, and believe me, I've been in a suicidal state before. Rationality is compromised from emotional well-being, so that you feel such strong emotional
Well, there'd be some sort of
reactions.
testing. There'd be some sort of rational testing
Well,
that you
I
could take.
agree. But if you're talking about, let's say, a euthanasia process, that this is what I would talk about. I would say that what we need to conclude is like would have to conclude a method in which we could allow someone, like freedom from existence. And I would say that the only reason I would characterize it as freedom is because their existence must be shown to ultimately have an ongoing negative impact upon them, regardless of any actions we could undertake to alleviate that suffering and give them a positive well-being experience.
Sure, I mean but the testing should be like set up very, very rationally. I mean, not by
I agree. I agree.
like not some sort of like like I honestly if you want to die and you have a mental illness, I can't see any rational reason why you shouldn't be allowed to. Like, look, a mental illness sucks. You didn't choose whether or not you have that mental illness, and look, there's in
Yeah, but have you ever like I don't know, had like stood on like a piece of Lego before, right? And it really, really hurts in the moment. And there's a part of you that it hurts so bad, you like just take the foot. Just take it. I don't even
yeah,
need the foot anymore.
yeah,
But it
yeah.
wouldn't have
Well,
been the
there's
rational decision, because otherwise you'd be going on to live a more negative experience. Now,
well, see,
the only
I
reason
would
that's
argue there would
the only
be.
reason that there was an not analogous to this situation is we'll be saying that we'll be ending experience. But then, in which case,
Yeah.
we would be saying that when we harm someone, we would not be able to harm someone after we kill them. So then, for example, if like you're a vegan, and I think it's important to recognize that if I was to say that I would not harm someone, um, by killing them, if as long as they were unaware of it, and that actually ending their life was not a harm to them, then what I could say is that by hunting, for example, in which I didn't make the decision to bring that animal into the world, and actually I'm arguably alleviating their potential for suffering onwards in the world, then ultimately by hunting, I am removing their not only their ability to suffer, but I'm also gaining what I want from the animal. So, what would be your rejection of that scenario?
Of hunting.
Yeah,
Well, look, I think that most of these mechanisms are done incredibly sloppily. I don't think that these people are. I don't think that sorting through this life game is like in these mechanisms is ever really nice to watch at all, or nice to, you know what I mean. That's basically what you're claiming. I don't think it's a nice thing to be hunting. I don't think that it's a nice thing to be doing these things, but at the end of the day, so I would press the red button, so to speak, okay, to get rid of 100% of it. If we could get rid of 100% of the sentient life, I'd press that red button, because I think that through the mechanism of prevention, that the suffering prevented would just be colossally greater than anything that could be done by allowing it to continue, allowing it to eat itself, specifically the animal kingdom, but also the human kingdom. I would preface though that I would like it for the human beings to be down to a finite group of people through the mechanism of not reproducing. So not like not massacring each other or warring with each other or anything like that. I don't want to do any of that. I don't want to nuke people or anything like that. The bottom line is just through the mechanism of obviousness that it's, this is a state of necessity that we're subjecting people to. It's a purely selfish thing to bring them into existence. Through the mechanism of prevention, we can prevent all of their suffering. So why wouldn't we just, I think we're pressing that red button if we're being rational people about what we value every single time. If we could eradicate 100% of it.
Well, I would say that I'd say like prefacing it as the rational position is not necessarily true. I think,
would you press the button or not?
No.
If you could get rid of 100% of the sentient life, so you'd be able to stop all of the trillions, hundreds of trillions of animals in the animal kingdom that are just butchering each other 24/7, eating each other's faces off, ripping their jaws off, dying of, long-term diseases of their jaw after it's been totally ripped off over the course of their life. For like, how could you not press the button you wouldn't press the button to put that animal out of its misery, to put that.
I mean, if we're talking about, let's say, like either ors, like I would much rather be able to press a button that would alleviate to the greatest degree the suffering that animals would face whilst giving them the greatest likelihood of a good life.
So euthanizing all
for
neutering.
example,
so if we neutered all the animals, is that what you want to do? I mean, that's not a rational mechanism, right? Like if we can't go through that mechanism, if we just alleviate, there's no way to alleviate all their suffering. There's trillions of animals dying every single day in nature. It's way worse than any slaughterhouse. Slaughterhouses are happening within the realm of nature, through human beings, which are also within the realm of nature, the animal kingdom. Okay, specifically the animal kingdom is what's the problem. Feeling this pain thing is the problem. Okay, and there's ultimately way more suffering happening in the natural world, in the animal kingdom specifically, than there even is in these slaughterhouses by factors of trillions. All right.
Well, I don't think that's necessarily true.
Oh, it's a fact. It's an absolute fact.
I mean, like if we look at how many animals actually have birthed into existence, I mean, their populations are incredibly high. I mean, like it depends, and obviously how they're treated, and ultimately, like the frustration of their desires is arguably greater. They also don't feel
in the animal kingdom. Just for some figures for you, some mathematical figures for you. Okay, it's estimated by a couple mathematicians here that there have been factors of hundreds of trillions of animals, sentient animals specifically, that have died in nature, in the animal kingdom over the last 541 million years. So you would toil with all of that's way more than any in slaughterhouses.
I'm not going to sit here and defend, like, for example, that I would gladly allow the suffering of animals if I could so prevent it.
Okay, well, you can. There's a rational mechanism for preventing it, and it's actually more rational than even going about convincing people of veganism.
Wait a minute, no, but you can't. That's you can't just preface something as rational.
Well, look, right? I'm going to explain. There's a more rational mechanism.
We can go through it, but
like if we want to go through it, I mean, do we want to talk about the mechanisms for veganism first then? Go ahead.
So wait a minute. So if we look at it like this, right? Like, if I could make a decision to overall increase the well-being ratio of animals, I would do that before, just annihilating all of their experiences. I would also say that what we mean by good and bad in the first place relates to subjective experience, and so by annihilating subjective experience, you don't, prevent bad and obtain good.
Well, no, the action of prevention is just stopping something from happening or arising. So what you just said there is not I quite find it absurd.
The whole point is that
of course it's preventing it.
If we cannot act in the interests of someone who does not exist, then how can we act how can we prevent their suffering? So if we can't say that we can do something good for them,
Well, the
then how
word
can we do
prevention just
something
means
to
the
prevent
action of
bad?
stopping something from
Yeah.
happening or arising. It doesn't mean it's not concerned with whether or not there's a good or a bad for a being that doesn't exist yet.
Well,
It's
it
just asking whether or
absolutely
not there
does.
can be no, it's not. It's asking whether or not something can be prevented for that being. And if you're asking this question, then obviously it's reasonable. So, look,
Yeah, well, like I mean, like for example, like,
through the mechanism of prevention we're talking about.
yeah, so like what we're saying is that okay, so we could prevent suffering, and but we would also be preventing any form of well-being.
Yeah, but
And
look,
so
we just discussed that
what
there's
we really
isn't.
need to talk about is whether that an animal or a human can have an expression of a good life, of having a worthy value experience within the world that is worthwhile to be continued. That if they
Okay,
had not have haven't
so
had it,
preface.
it would
What do
be
you
an
think is worthy?
impoverishment on the notion of good.
Please explain to me what you think is worthy. Then, what do you think is something that would be that person would be doing more than if they just didn't reproduce in the first place? Please, we've already covered uh, curing cancer. I mean, I don't know if we can do my bet. You
Well,
think
okay,
there's
like,
something better than that?
like, I mean, like, I never really got a reply to your point for curing cancer, for
Okay, yeah.
example.
Please reply
Like,
to that.
like, the idea of that, if you cure cancer, you wouldn't necessarily be alleviating suffering. Well, you absolutely would be.
No,
Um,
it's not what I'm claiming at all. No, I'm just claiming that
no, but
the
you're saying that you
suffering.
could alleviate more. You could say you could alleviate more
Yes,
by not having.
yes.
Of course, but then you
Well,
would
not
also be
just could
preventing
you
all the well.
almost.
So
Okay,
the whole point of curing cancer is
but
to change the
you're
well-being
naming.
ratio.
But so the well-being would be to cure the cancer, and we just talked about the math behind this. Okay, so it would actually just be alleviating a pain, right? Like, so it's not a well-being just by itself. We've already clarified that
Okay,
for
but
love.
then the life of that individual may have a characteristically overall positive connotation if we remove something like cancer, which may affect the balance of well-being. Like that's kind of the point. The pain pleasure ratio of that being would ultimately be moved perhaps towards pleasure if they never experienced the hardship and the emotional toils of cancer. So
So
I don't understand that. For example, like if we were to
what do you?
prevent the being in general, we would lose all the pleasure and the pain. If we were to
Yeah,
prevent
just give me an
cancer, we
example.
would
Just
just
name
lose
the
the pain.
well-being. Just give me an example. So
So just
you already gave the cancer thing. I mean, that's
I've already said
preventing
that
a pain.
I don't think that there is intimately
We'll
a
give
form
another
of
one then.
pain or pleasure that can act independently. I don't think you could live a life of inherently good or bad without respect to a privation of either. I think a good example would be, for example, when Augustine talks
Like, so what you
about
just claimed, like the good is not needed until you're born, man. Right.
yes. I mean, like that's the whole point. Like good and bad isn't. It has to be in reference to a subject.
But we're not talking about good and bad. I'm just talking about the mechanism of prevention, and then it's good through prevention. If you think that something is good through prevention, then you agree with this concept, right? If you think that preventing somebody's cancer would be good, or preventing the animals from coming into existence that are going to be holocausted for their flesh and secretions,
There's a difference. There's
no,
a
there's
definite
not.
difference
No,
between
there
preventing
isn't.
someone and preventing cancer. I thought that was obvious.
No, it. Look, that's not what we're. The action of prevention. The word prevention just means the action of stopping something from happening or arising. That's all. It has. So if you think that something can be good through the
But in
mechanism of
reference to
prevention,
what? Like yeah, but like we wouldn't say that all preventions would then be good. Would we? Like for example, like if I prevented, let's say, there's a difference between preventing something like I don't know, deaths from a hurricane, and the difference between preventing I don't know uh, like I don't know Bernie Sanders winning the presidential election or something. Like they've got very different connotations, are very different outcomes. So the actual value which would be in relation to the action, the point of intention may be the same. It would be the same that it's a form of intended prevention, but the overall value that is propagated would be inherently different. So it obviously matters to what we are acting to achieve. And what I'm saying is that by acting to achieve to prevent the births of people, we are acting to prevent them, and when we act to prevent cancer, we act to prevent someone suffering from cancer, and that they are very different acts. It's
No, well,
one
but just
changes the pain pleasure ratio of the universe,
proxy,
one annihilates it.
right? So by proxy of this, like, yeah, it would prevent, it would cause a prevention. So you have to agree that it's causing a prevention, right?
Okay, yes, I believe that they're both prevention.
Yeah, so they're both prevention, right? So if you value prevention for one, you have to value prevention for the other.
No, I don't inherently value prevention. Why would I inherently value prevention? Like, I mean, like, for example, I could
just
I could
to be
prevent
logically
myself
consistent.
from. Well, no, because like, for example, logical consistency. Do I need to prevent myself from doing everything?
Hold on, sorry. So why do you need to prevent myself from doing everything?
Like, if I mean logically
you don't
consistent,
need to prevent yourself from doing everything. You're just preventing the serious pain. That's what is the problem.
So
here.
So what I'm doing is I'm preventing a negative outcome in relation to a subject.
Well,
what
like
you're talking about is preventing a subject.
So did we agree?
I'm talking about preventing pain to a subject. So that's a different thing.
We agreed on the axiom earlier that we are existing in a state of necessity. We're existing in a state of where we can be deprived of things from a state of being a necessity. So we're actually talking about subjecting somebody to all of the harm, not just like some of it, right? Like any of the harm. You're subjecting them to 100% of it. Through the mechanism of risk, right?
I mean, this is what it's about. It's about moral hazard, and whether that this hazard would be a worthwhile undertaking. So whether that we would be doing something positive or negative.
Look, I don't think that you've named the well-being that isn't derived from a pain yet, but we could just grant.
Why is that the goal? Why is that the goalpost anyway?
Because it's a perfectly reasonable goalpost to have, because the bottom line is.
You mean derived from why? For one, like, could I not name a pain that would be derived from a well-being? I mean, the whole point is the positive.
There's plenty of pains. No. There's plenty of pains that occur by themselves. There's plenty of pains, I would argue, occur by themselves, that if you're going to argue for them.
Give me an example of a pain that occurs by itself that doesn't have any form of.
Dax cohorts.
That's not. I mean, like, give us an actual pain. Like, don't give us someone that like had felt pain. Like, give it.
I mean, like, okay. I mean, they say him burning alive. The specific example of burning alive. You think there's a well-being derived from burning alive?
What, like, as in, like, do I think that there is a well-being in relation to having, a life of, let's say, feeling like comfort and warmth and well-being in relation to my sense experience? Absolutely, I would say that. I don't know about you, but like, there's a difference between, for example, what you're talking about is an extreme of nature in which I experience, let's say, like the excruciating pain of burning alive versus, I could be, cozy in a blanket. I would say that they are relation to positive and negatives of the same thing.
Wait, you just compared being cozy in a blanket to burning alive?
Yeah, one's good, one's bad, but they both relate to a sense experience.
Well, they're not. It's not a. I'm sorry, I just didn't mean to laugh there, but it's like, look, it's not.
Okay.
It's not a pain by its. I'm not trying to be disrespectful, all right? It's just a. It's not a pain that's by its. I'm sorry, it's not a pain that isn't. All right, look, it's a pain that's by itself, right? Like, burning alive is not indicative of a well-being at all. Okay, and then, for example, being cozy in a blanket is indicative of not wanting to be cold. It's indicative of not wanting to be cold in the blanket. Right.
So,
so you make the blanket happen.
Are you making the point? Kind of like, are you kind of making like the Buddhist point of that? That if the only form of well-being is the cessation of desire, because desire as a constant action urging process continues on even while it is being satiated. So when we are feeling a pleasure, for example, then when we satiate that pleasure, we will still feel a bitterness, because once we satiate that pleasure, we are still desiring continuously. So there is still pain present. And so the life is suffering, and that's where the Buddhist, notion of life is suffering comes from. Is that kind of the point you're making?
Yes, Yes, it is, and
Yeah,
but
yeah, Buddhism's wrong.
yeah, but
And
Buddhism sucks. But Buddhism sucks, though. I mean, like, I'm
no, but
not.
like,
I'm sorry. Like,
no, no, but I mean, even that point, I think it's wrong. So if I was to say like,
like, look. I mean, just Buddhism. Let me just preface why I said that. Okay, because like Buddhism doesn't do anything to actually impede the suffering. It just does it for the people that accept Buddhism, right? Like they do all.
well, I mean, I did Buddhist
the
ethics, and I think it really cares about suffering.
Yeah, it
Like,
cares about suffering, but it doesn't do anything to actually prevent it at the end of the day. It's not advocating against it, right?
well, actually, I mean, if anything, it's advocating the same thing as you, which is the cessation of desire.
Look, I mean, to some extent, but at the end of the day, they don't get active about it. They talk about meditation. Actually, no, they talk about eliminating all of your desire, which is totally preposterous. That's why there's some of these crazy people that are Buddhists are lighting themselves on fire, thinking that they're going to be ascending from feeling the pain of the fire,
This
and they
mystic
fail every single
connotation.
time. So it's a big woo fest, and it has nothing to do with I mean, in that regard. But in the regard, all I'm saying is that in the regard of the Buddhist point that you made about there's a state of there isn't a well-being that isn't derived from a pain, and then there are pains by themselves. So there isn't a well-being that's by itself that you've named so far.
Well,
And there,
like
like,
what I'm trying to say is that like, so like, let's take the Buddhist point of like, this constant action urging process that can never be satiated, and that we will constantly feel this action urging process continue. I would actually agree with that. I think that, especially materialism, I think that's mostly clear. The lives of people who are, trying to satiate a material desire typically are the most unhappy, because they'll never feel any type of contentment. I think Plato describes this in Gorgias when he says it's like a bucket of water with holes in the bottom. As the desire constantly builds, there's only more holes. Like, all we do is like, we can keep satiating the desire as much as possible, but the more that we satiate, the more holes will occur, and so the water runs straight out, and we'll never feel contentment. And what contentment is this idea of a vessel which holds the water without losing it. So this idea that we can have a relationship with an object, yet not constantly desire something outwards and onwards, constantly perpetuate this suffering which is inherent to our desiring. And in which case, I would say that the only way that we could do that is, well, first, I think we need to understand the metaphysics of desire. And I think when we look at desire, we look outwards. So we desire an object, we desire something external, because the whole point, and I think the whole Buddhist point of the whole point of Buddhism is, once we have achieved a desire and we achieve that pleasure of having satiated it, we actually annihilate both the pain and pleasure at the same time, but we don't actually annihilate desire itself. That fundamentally moves through us.
okay,
We just annihilate that instance of desire. So the problem is that we've now, like, if I desired this cup, I now have this cup. I can no longer desire this cup because I have it. Therefore, I look outwards for something else. And typically, because I already have this cup, it'll be exasperated. I'll want something greater. I may want a bigger cup, a better cup, whatever the hell I want. Right? And now, that's one form of desire. Now, the only way that I could
desire
have
in the instant. So meditation, like if I were to stare at the wall, for example, and eliminate as much of my desires by staring at that point in the wall, right? Like, is this an example? This is an example of like some forms of meditation that I've heard of.
Oh yeah, I'm not making a point of like meditation or anything. No, I mean, what I'm saying is it depends upon the object of our desire in the. So if I desire, let's say, like something material, and then I possess it, then I've changed the metaphysical characteristics so much that my desire can no longer, that my desire permeates beyond the object, permeates onto objects, and this is no longer an object. So what I need is something which constantly resists my desire, and satiates it simultaneously, so that I'm in a perfect relationship between having the desire created and fulfilled. And that is a state of contentment. And I would say that the only thing that can do that is another being. And I would say, like, by another being, I mean another sentient being, something which has a self independent of my observation of it. Because if I accept that something has a metaphysical property of being objective from me, and I think that the resistance of the other kind of shows this. So if I look at someone else, I can never truly obtain them. I can never have them, because their mind, by definition, is separate from myself. And so if I was to obtain their mind, I would have destroyed it. So that object as an object can never be owned by me. They can never be ensouled by me in the words in an Aristotelian sense. And so if I was to say that I desire a person, or like the desire, in relation to that person, and have it fulfilled, then what I would actually be desiring is something which I can never fully actualize. So if I try to, control them, it wouldn't work and I would feel constant frustration. But if I was to desire, for us, a relationship between me and them, a respect in which they, we like a friendship or something like that, then I can have a relationship with them that is mutually satisfying, in which my desire pops up in relation to their well-being, or in relation to my well-being, in relation to this relationship that we have, and is satisfied by their existence. I can value them independently and then have that value satisfied simply for their existence, and they for me, and that would be a fulfilling relationship of desire without causing non-contentment. It would be a state of contentment, and that would be like in the Greek sense, aponia.
Well, so how are you defining that they wouldn't that this would be, so you're claiming that they could eliminate desire?
Can I just quickly say this as well? Just I saw in the chat somebody said this is a misunderstanding of Buddhism. I do agree that it depends on how we read Buddhism. For example, Buddhists might agree with what I've just said, which would explain things like altruistic joy. So it does depend upon the branch of Buddhism as well and how you interpret it. But I
haven't looked heavily into Buddhism, but I ultimately, like, I do understand what you just said about, like, what just came off to me was, like, you claimed that you can eliminate the desire for something in one instant, in like an instant, not all over the whole thing, not like nomologically, for example. You can't eliminate your desires that you have nomologically, right?
Well, I would say it's not about the elimination of well, I mean, it is in the sense that, like, eliminating desire. Like, desire is eliminated in a moment when we achieve an end for that desire. But what I would say is that desire itself.
See, I wouldn't say that. I would say it's obvious that it just keeps going. It depends on. You have necessities. You're living in a literal state of.
No, but like a desire. So like there's desire, and then there's a desire, isn't it? Like there's desire with a capital D, and then there's the desiring of an object.
Yeah,
like,
but it's always just a perpetual cause and effect chain of desire. Once you're already here, you can't do anything other than that.
Yeah, but the point, what I'm saying is, if you are desiring perpetually states of materialism. And objects, you are going to find objects. You're going to find that you live an unsatisfactory life, that you live an unhappy life. But what I'm saying is that a happy life, a state of contentment and well-being, is in fact is something like what Buddhists talk about with altruistic joy, and but without the notion of removing the self, because I think that is unnecessary. But what it is about the removing of perhaps selfish desire.
And so what I was just going to say, actually.
So then what we would say is,
chat, I'm saying, like, look, desiring perpetually is suffering perpetually. Like,
but but then we would also say, like, I mean, I can get the passage of Gorgias open if you like. We would also say that the satisfaction of desire was perpetually pleasure. And what I would say is that if you have a constant relationship with desire and the satiation of that desire throughout your life, and that exists within, the friendships and the bonds that we have as people, that this ultimately will lead to a happy life. And that's what the Greeks would have described as eudaimonia.
Eudaimonia. Well, look, I just don't see how you're defining a well-being that is not derived from a pain, ultimately, okay? Because we are talking about things that is all occurring within a state of necessity that you have to fill in order to just survive. I mean,
I would say, like for example, there's the pains of surviving, and then there's the pleasures of surviving. I think that's the point. Like, mixed in our being is the propensity to feel both pain and pleasure. I think that's the whole point. It's desire and satisfaction, and that That is the
Because
relationship
it's the point.
of subjectivity with our
This
being
person
that
is
drives us
claiming that.
onwards.
Why do I keep going back to that? Well, I keep going back to that because it's just the obvious point. I mean, we're talking about prevention through the mechanism of, not being born in the first place. We're talking about a state of necessity that you're born into. That's ultimately what we're talking about. We're not talking. All I have to do is repeat the question. I mean, he's not answering the question, right? Like, he's claiming that this well-being thing is somehow well-being by itself or intrinsically well-being, and it's
I never said
obviously.
that.
Well, look, I mean,
I said that it's a relation. I said that desire is a relation
all
between
right, it's a
like
relationship.
pain and pleasure, and that's what
So
subjectivity
how is
is.
how is it the well-being that isn't derived from a pain?
But I'm saying that there is no such thing as independently pain or pleasure. Like,
I
you
think,
cannot
but there
have.
is something independent that is pain. Like, unless you want to argue that burning alive has some form of well-being associated with it.
Okay, let's say you were
Just
a
like
being
just like the loony ass Buddhist
let's
people
like go
were
like
doing,
let's go
who
like
got
right
really
past.
into
Let's
all
go
the
like
metaphysics that you're talking shit about right now, and they set themselves
right.
on fucking fire.
So
And they
I don't agree
screamed.
with.
They ran and they screamed. They're on the internet right now. You could go and look them up if you'd like to. They're fucking wooey as hell, and they got really
I'm
heavily in
pretty
depth into all
sure.
that stuff. And I'm pretty sure they're screaming and running around on fire.
I don't think I've ever advocated for setting anyone on fire. But I guess
Have you ever seen somebody
the
resisting the fire? Like, he
no,
said he disagreed with
I
Buddhism. Don't strawman him. Well, look, okay, but ultimately he's claiming that his interpretation of Buddhism is that this thing is somehow
no,
impeding
like the whole
pain.
point of
It's
what
not pain by
I'm
itself, and he's not
no, I never
describing
said
something.
that like Buddhism necessarily like impedes pain. Like, I think that's probably right, that there is a futility in the perhaps the block reading of Buddhism as being like, what's the word, the initial reading someone might take of Buddhism, and understand that as just the cessation of desire, as being the elimination of our desire inherently. I would say that is probably futile, and I would agree there. But what I'm saying is that happiness and a state of contentment can exist in a pleasure pain relationship within a being, and that's what we need to focus on, and that's how we achieve like a state of contentment within our lives. And I think that harkens back to something that would be more of an ancient Greek philosophy, and I think that's why I would probably perpetuate more of an ancient Greek philosophy over a Buddhist philosophy. But there are some readings of Buddhism which align further with like an ancient Greek approach, but not
Okay,
everybody.
you can tell me whether this is in line somewhat with what you're claiming. Asceticism. Have you ever heard of that term before?
Sorry, asceticism?
Asceticism.
No, I don't think I have.
Okay, well, it's a Buddhist term. It's like I remember it from a long time ago, right? Uh, like we could just search for it really quickly.
Like, did you say aestheticism or asceticism?
Asceticism. Just type in asceticism, Buddhism. So
How do you,
severe self-discipline and avoidance of all forms of indulgence, typically for religious reasons. It's like this is what they go.
oh, right,
about.
yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, this is the mechanism
I
that
thought you were
Buddhists
saying
people. And I understand.
asceticism.
So you don't agree with this mechanism, but
No, I don't think that works.
Okay, so this is what you're saying. You don't think this works, right?
No.
Okay, and this is what you're saying, right?
Yeah, like as in like deprivation of desire does not lead to a fulfilled happy life, because you cannot fully extinguish desire without destroying your subjectivity. In which case, what you've done is created perhaps maybe a form of ego death, which is comparative to suicide.
Okay, so what you are saying though is that you can just completely eliminate both pain and pleasure without actually in a specific instance. Is that correct?
I'm saying that the instance in which pain and pleasure, that in which a desire, not all desire, but a desire, is fulfilled, there is the instance of pleasure, and in that instance, the pleasure and the pain are both annihilated simultaneously, as the desire and the satisfaction are annihilated. So that is a moment in which we feel both the bad, the drive towards the object relieved, and the appreciation of the object also relieved. And what my point is that good has to be in relation to a negative, but that negative, if it's and that negative is in relation to a good. And so if there was no satisfaction of desire, if it was there was no, ability to change, there would be no ethical good. We wouldn't say that we could do something good or bad in relation to it. We would just be. And in fact, metaphysically, we wouldn't even understand a difference of experiences, because we'd be constantly experiencing a state of being which would be indistinguishable from another state of being. So it wouldn't even make sense for us to say something like, I want to live a better life or whatever, because the word better would be nonsensical, because it wouldn't relate to a metaphysical distinction between experiences. Well, phenomenological distinction.
Okay,
But I guess
what we are talking about, though, at the end of the day,
if I may, the point what I am making is actually that what we should seek is eudaimonia, and eudaimonia is this the ability to direct the desiring process onto something in which we will feel the constant that we can never stop desiring it, as in we will never feel the satisfaction of that desire permanently, but that it will be that we can continuously desire it, because it will never become an object which we can associate ourselves. It can never be property. So it would be constantly separate, and as being constantly separate, our desire can be directed towards it and satisfied. And that constant relationship is essentially what I would say is the balance between pleasure and pain, and that's what we have to work out. What is it that will bring the eudaimonic experience in which we could say that we have created the perfect balance between pleasure and pain in forms of desire? And I think that the only way that we can say this, and I think that Aristotle was right, it's a form of friendship, in a form of caring for others, in which we say that we reject the notion of selfish interest, and we form a notion of mutual interest. And that's why ethics is, in the words of the Greeks, eudaimonia is virtue and happiness simultaneously. And that's what I think the main mistake is. And I think when we characterize, for example, the painful existence of people nowadays, I would say that there is a greater likelihood that people feel lots of dread and existential suffering. And I think that's characteristic of the meaningless, purposeless existence in which they feel. I mean, if you look at what Nietzsche said, I think is being true, and he warned of nihilism, which was, he kind of caused it, but he did warn of it. And he said that suffering itself is not inherently bad, and that people don't dislike it. But what is bad for humans is meaningless suffering. And I think that's the point. It is the point in which we understand that there is a relationship between pleasure and pain which can bring an overall good to our lives. And, all you have to do is look at something like exercise. The pains of exercise, without respect to the overall outcome, seem unbearable. Why would we subject ourselves to such an experience? But if we say that, it's to better our lives and form a better experience, that I do it for the act of exercising, that I appreciate the sport that I play, that I enjoy doing it, that there is something that I value external to myself, and that's why I do it, then we see that the exercise can perhaps be a form of good. But ultimately, I would say the only real good that we can achieve has to be intersubjective. It has to be mutually dependent.
Okay, so all I would say in response to that exercise point is that obviously it's not a well-being that is not derived from a pain, right? So it's not, you still have to, whether it be you're exercising because you want to get some blood flow in your body to alleviate some health, problems later in life, or whether it be you want to do it to alleviate a state of boredom. Like there's different types of exercise that people will undertake. Okay, so I still don't think that this is it's obviously not.
But all you're pointing out is that there are positive and negative states again. Like it's like you will feel one or the other. That's a given. There is no such thing as a perfect neutral state within a being that exists. I mean, that's the point. It's either good or bad. It's on or off.
No, it's a state. I'm just claiming that there isn't a well-being that you've named so far. So you're claiming this eudaimonia thing. Like, let's look at that. All right. So is this? There's other ways we can come at this. But the bottom line is like
just to double check. Sorry. Somebody said in the comments there that the volume of you might be low and I might be high. You see, you sound fine for me, for the stream.
Do I sound good now? How do I sound? Am I all right? How's my sound? So the beings that don't exist yet don't care if if they're happy or if they're sad. So like you're talking about, like that's the bottom line, right? So like it's still a selfish act to bring them into existence, as we
How
prefaced
can
at
it
the
be
very beginning.
how can it be selfish if I can't act in their interests or in either case? And again, if I'm saying that I'm acting in the interest, for example, even if let's say, I think would be a better way to look at this is not to say that I am acting in the interests of the being by preventing their suffering, but that what I'm looking in respect of is the action I am undertaking of bringing a life into the world, and whether that will increase suffering or well-being. I can't be doing it for someone. I must be doing it within relation to perhaps the concept of everyone of humanity or whatever it may be.
So the
Um,
unborn don't need to exist in this state of indwelling spirit or being in a contended state of being healthy, happy, and prosperous. You know, they don't need
they
that.
don't well, they don't need to, but they
No, but then
don't
they
also need
but
not to.
but wouldn't
They
you
also
say they
don't need
need
not
to
to be
avoid?
set on fire. And no, they
Yeah,
don't
and
need to
that's what I'm.
do.
No, actually, they do need. I would argue that they do need to not be set on fire, for
But they're
sure.
not alive. They don't exist. They can't have a
So like,
desire
so
to
no
not
one
be
in
set on
here
fire.
and all these assholes that are talking shit from your channel and the channel, they probably don't even know what eudaimonia is to begin with. But then, even if like, let alone care about it. But the bottom line is,
Well, there's no
they
need
don't
to
even they don't need it,
characterize.
and then they do care about not burning alive, right? And that's an opportunity for them if they come into
I mean,
existence.
look at it like this. I understand,
So here's
but
your
there's no need to characterize my audience
the
for
guy
one,
who
and
is
I don't think
well. This
that's
guy's
like
talking shit. He says I'm a massive bell end. Here, man, take
okay.
this.
Well,
Put the clown nose on, you goon. Okay, and there you go, for you, you fucking clown. Not you,
I
guy I'm
wouldn't.
talking to. Just the asshole in
Yeah,
chat.
I wouldn't worry about it,
Well,
man.
look, yeah. Well, like, bottom line is, I
In
mean,
context
they
of the
don't like good indwelling spirits or being in a contended state of healthy and happy. You can't like, it's perfectly fine if you're not in that fucking state to the point where no one even knows what the fuck eudaimonia means. Everybody knows that burning alive is catastrophic, and
well,
you need to avoid that.
well, I mean, like, I think we should all educate ourselves on how to better life. Because otherwise, then what's the point? What's the point of the debate? Like, if we're not caring about it in the first place, then we shouldn't care about our actions and the consequences. So, I mean, that's what the whole point is. This is an act of education, is it not?
Did you
And
just become Satan, or am I like some form of? Am I? Is there an illusion with his voice going on? Did it just get deeper? Or am I? Yeah, for sure it did. It just got a little deeper. He's pulling the what do you call it? The what the fuck is that guy's name? Used to do stuff like that. Steve Jobs. He used to pull the whole deeper voice to try to influence more people thing.
well,
Anyways,
not really. I mean, like,
sorry.
I've run out of if that's it.
Okay, I
Well, I
believe
mean,
you.
like,
All right. Well, anyways, look, this eudaimonia thing. Just bottom line is, I'm just having fun, man. It's just like
Yeah.
like a eudaimonia thing. This eudaimonia thing. All right, and I'm being sincere. I am being sincere, by the way. I don't know
Right,
whether or
yeah.
not you were or not.
I believe
But,
you.
like, I'm being very sincere when I say that no one gives a fuck about indwelling spirits or being contended in a contended state of healthy and happy and prosperous compared to not burning alive.
Well, the point of the matter is that just a second ago you said that I could not try and act in the interests of of an unborn, of a non-sentient being, that's someone that did not exist. But then you said that I could act in the interests of a sentient being that did not exist. So what we're talking what we're, what we're talking about is the overall well-being ratio of that child, or that does or does not exist, or we're talking about the consequences of our actions. Mate, like, if you're not going to be sincere to the conversation, then what's the point? Like, honestly, what's the point? And
Well,
I think
I'm being very sincere. I can't. It's a comedy show. Oh man, that's just comedy show type shit with that voice there. But anyways, like, all right, so like, just the straight up the point is just, I'm not being a fucking moron. What are you talking about? He's changed his voice. I don't know whether he freaking did it on purpose or not. It's still funny. I mean, you don't think that's funny? I thought
Look,
some people thought
like,
that was
right,
funny.
you know, like maybe it's just subjective and all that, like comedy. But the thing is that the point of what I'm saying is that if we look at the action itself of, you know, bringing someone into the world or not, if we aren't doing it to benefit, what I'm saying is if we're doing it to benefit them or not, then we can act in their interests. If we are not doing it for them, then we could still act non-selfishly regardless by doing it for the greater good of something like society anyway. We could say that we are trying to change the ratio in which we are.
Yeah, look, it's the
I
beings
mean,
that don't
what would
exist
you
yet
be?
don't care either way, and I would argue that
So yes,
there's
so
more of a priority to not have them burn alive than there is to have them feel eudaimonia. There's more of a priority to not have them suffer child molestation than there is to have eudaimonia. There's more of a priority. There's more of a priority. Bottom line is there's more of a priority to prevent somebody from experiencing cancer than there is to experience this eudaimonia thing. So what the fuck are you talking about?
I don't think you understand the difference of what you're comparing. It's not analogous. Couldn't say that, for example, like having someone not experience versus someone having an experience which is the perfect experience.
So
they
which one do you think is more unethical?
Things. Do you mean, like, for example, if you say by not having experienced cancer, we'd be saying that experiencing eudaimonia and experiencing perpetual suffering, they are polar opposites. Having experience and not having experience, they are polar opposites. But having eudaimonia and not experiencing cancer because you were never born, they are not polar opposites. What I would say is that when we look,
it's about what you value more. I mean, do you value somebody not burning alive more, or do you value them?
What I'm saying is that
experiencing eudaimonia. Which one would you rather have? Which one would you rather have? Not burning alive or experiencing eudaimonia? Which one would you rather have?
Well, the whole point is
not burning alive or eudaimonia. Like if you had to pick between.
Well, I don't think you. Well, the whole point is that we're seeking eudaimonia. That's the whole point.
Yeah, so you're seeking eudaimonia, but you're contending with burning alive.
To seek eudaimonia, you would have to. Like,
so why do you want to play that game?
Eudaimonia and burn alive, like that. That wouldn't make any sense. Like,
why do you want to toil with the possibility of these progeny burning alive?
But then what you're saying is that it's a greater moral hazard. So what you've got to do is show that there is a greater likelihood to suffer rather than they will feel.
No, I don't. It's a risk. You're making the risk. Who's the more logical person? The person who's risking everything, or the person who doesn't risk anything?
Are all risks unjustified?
Yes. So when it comes down to the bottom line, so like when we're talking about whether or not to prevent them from having the chance to be experience any of the necessity of existence that you agreed on earlier, yes, of course.
What I'm saying is that let's say we were to look at it like this.
I just answered your question just as like totally straightforward as possible. I'm not dipping or ducking or diving into your questions, and you are to mine, but that's totally fine.
I don't think I am. So, I just think that you're overly simplifying things, and that's fine.
It's not overly simplifying anything. It's just honest. I mean, I'm just being completely honest with you. Look, the bottom line is that you're contending with something that is just catastrophic for something that is at best just aloof.
Well, this is the point I'm saying, is that what we are saying is that they would necessarily have to have a greater likelihood of a negative experience, catastrophic negative experience, than perhaps even the greatest overall good experience.
They all die.
Yes, but that's saying that, well, death isn't necessarily inherently negative because it is also a life. So what you're saying is that death is such a pain.
It's about risk. I mean, are you okay with risking that? You're okay with risking the worst things to achieve this aloof topic of eudaimonia.
What the whole point is that we can risk it. The whole point is what makes a risk worth undertaking is the balance between the positive and negative that could occur for these beings and occur for beings in general, right? So we were to say that if they could experience a relationship with themselves, their environment, and how they live their lives that was an overall positive, then the risk would be worthy undertaking because we would be doing an overall good. Just as we would be doing an overall good by not having them if we were acting in their interest, if we knew they were going to suffer. That is the point. So either you're being contradictory
in saying that we cannot act in their interests, and or you are saying that we are acting in the interests of something else, in which case I would say that we're talking about, the abstract concepts of goodness and badness, which are in relation to humanity as a whole. And I'm happy to argue under either premise, but you have to be specific there. And furthermore, I would say that when we look at the likelihood of them having good and bad, I would say that that is mostly modified by, for example, the state. And I think it's Heraclitus who says that when he was asked, what would you do to give a man a good life? And he says, give him a good state. Well, what I would say that he's trying to express there is that if we gain the values and this understanding of valuation from our society, from our culture, that overall it teaches us how to approach these, potential pains of our existence, and how to mediate the negatives and increase the positives. And that's what ethics is about. So, like, when Sartre says the disabled man disables himself, and he says that, he could use it as an opportunity to live a more meaningful, purposeful life, which will bring him a greater or positive phenomenological experience, that's because the disposition that this man had ultimately led him to have a greater experience regardless of the phenomena that he's experienced. It's not saying that, okay, it's not an inherent bad, but that we could have a better relationship with good and bad. And that's what ethics is about. Now, I don't see what's wrong there.
Okay, well, I mean, are you okay with risking just the worst things, right? Like, so that they can experience this state of eudaimonia?
1 second. Do I sound okay now?
Right, like, are you okay with them holocausting animals?
Before I answer, I want to just make sure that I sound okay. Do I sound okay, guys? Like, in the chat? Do I not sound all right? What's wrong with the sound? Could you just characterize it so I can try and maybe adjust it?
I can hear you perfectly fine. Is he all right?
Please fix the mic. Is it still sound like Lucifer? Yeah, it must be something. It must be something going on.
I know. I told you I was being sincere. I'm always being sincere. For fuck's sake.
Yeah, but I thought you meant sound deeper, not like as in like. Right. Okay. I have no idea what's going on here. I think it must be. Is there something with the stream, perhaps? Because, like, I mean, I don't see what could be going wrong on this end. Has me. 1 second. I'll just quickly check me. It's still coming out. 1 second.
Well, while you're on the subject of sounding like Lucifer, do you think that the worst things justify the most amusing things? I mean, I'm sorry, this is horrible. We have to fix your microphone. It's just, yeah. Here, I'll leave and then come back really quick. Okay, I'll be right back. Okay, I'm gonna leave the call and then we'll join back. Okay. Okay. Hold on. Hopefully this works. Is he there? Are you there? It should be functioning perfectly fine. I believe it was just your microphone.
Hello?
Oh, you sound much better now, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah,
right.
there we go.
Yeah.
Wow,
Okay.
I'll be damned. Yeah. That fixed it like night and day. Okay, well, good. Okay, I told you I was just being perfectly sincere.
I thought you said deeper. I didn't mean that. I sounded like a bloody robot, man. Like.
Yeah, it got super deep. It was like you were trying to pull some shit on me there.
Did people understand what did people understand what I was expressing though? Like, could you understand what I was saying? Or was it just sounding ridiculous?
I get what you're claiming, right? Like, you don't think that there can be a good or a bad for a being that doesn't exist.
Yeah, I mean,
right.
or if we accept that there could be, then like the idea of the being, for example, and that's what we are respecting.
Yeah.
And which I would say that's what I would say that we do respect, and that's why I would say that when we are respecting the narrative of that being's life, which is understanding of what the being is,
and the object of that being, which is why cutting someone's life short, let's say by stabbing them in the back of the head without them knowing it, you'll be doing them a harm, because you'll be saying that without regardless of the pain that
this all
would
just
be
comes
caused.
back, right? Yeah,
Because we would say that the overall narrative of their life would have a different pain and pleasure ratio, would have a different experience of good and bad. It might be better to say that
the
they
whole
would have,
point, though,
if they
that I'm
went
trying
on
to
and
claim,
had a good life, then we would have a negative value, a lower value.
So the whole point that I'm just trying to claim here, right, is like, since you don't value causing pain is bad and preventing pain is good, but you do in some instances, would it justify the worst things? Would the things that you could bring them into existence that they could possibly toil with that were the worst things justify the things that they could toil with that are the whatever,
the best things,
the best things, or the most amusing things? I mean, we really, if we're going to be honest, we'd have to calculate them as the most amusing things. But sure, the best things, whatever.
Why would we have to be honest? Well,
look, I mean, if we're going to be honest, we're not naming something that isn't derived from a pain.
When you're saying derived, I don't think it's necessarily derived from a pain. I think that the whole point is that pain and pleasure are both aspects of our experience. That one is not indicative of the other. It's not like as if, like.
Well, it is, unless you can name the thing that is just totally not associated with. But let's just grant your position of the best. Let's grant your position of the best thing. Let's just grant your position. Let's just grant your position of the best thing. So do the best things justify the worst things we could come up with, even in hypothetical land? I mean, do you think that the best things can come up with can justify the worst things? All right. So let's go into want to go hypothetical, because we're never going to agree on this whole whether or not you think that preventing pain is good and
well, I would say that I would say that overall in our lives, I think that would probably have a greater. I would say that there is probably a greater pain response to certain negatives than there is a pleasure response to certain positives.
Okay, well then you're agreeing with what I'm saying. Then there is obviously a cause.
No, because what I'm saying is that if I could guarantee a being had a life, if I could guarantee a being had a life, for example, in which they wouldn't get set on fire, and then would experience I don't know, things like wonder, joy, happiness, relationships with others, and so on, then yeah, that's better. But also as well, I mean that in a non-cognitive sense. I think we'll have a greater greater non-cognitive relationship with pain. But how we approach that cognitively modifies what the pain phenomena is and how we experience it. And it's this modification that I think is what ethics is about. For example, setting yourself on fire, that's ultimately a horrible action. But how you what you are focusing on, even in that instance, would modify their experience, would it not? So, for example, if you were to, I'm not saying this is a good thing. I'm just saying, for example,
this is what the Buddhist people do. This is what they do. They try to focus on something that isn't the pain while they're burning alive, and it doesn't work.
Well, I mean, what we would say is that one, it may be there's a few reasons why it might work. One, it may be really difficult. Two, even if it was successful, it's not necessarily a good then, is it? And then three, I think that when we look at what I'm saying is not necessarily the complete elimination of pain, but that the phenomenological experience of pain is mitigated by your sense of it. I think a good example would be take a child versus an adult. I think an adult who stubs their toe may feel less pain than a child who stubs their toe, because an adult can place themselves in a state of mental of awareness, which they know, for example, that the pain is going to end. They may think about something which is other than the pain. They may distract themselves and contemplate something else, and that awareness ultimately modifies what the experience of life is, right? Yeah, well, the child mightn't be able to do that. Now, what
all you're
I'm
claiming
saying
at the end of the day is that the good and the bad can't happen if the being doesn't exist in the first place. And right now, you're doing the same example that you gave sort of earlier about how you think that. Well, would you accept? Well, you agreed that it was analogous with the statement would you accept $1,000 for a pinprick, right? And I'm claiming that this is what I'm saying is disanalogous with that by simply saying that, we're actually preventing the need for the $1,000 in the first place. Right.
Yeah, but like,
so we're going in circles here, and the bottom line is that you
like,
just don't value preventing the pain at the end of the day, right? Like you don't value causing pain is bad and preventing pain is good. Let's just move on to the next thing.
Bad.
Well, let's just move on to the next thing here, and I think that pain, like there are pains that are inherently bad. That just are inherently painful. Like you're not convincing me why there is something for a person that's burning alive. And I think I made a convincing argument for somebody experiencing this eudaimonia thing being an addiction or being a state of deprivation that they're trying to alleviate, like a boredom or something like that, or something trivial like that. Like that's what it ends up being at the end of the day. It's not something that is just completely.
I don't think you actually tackled eudaimonia at all.
Oh, look, all right, so good indwelling spirit or being in a content. Well, that's what eudaimonia is on a positive psychology program.
First, let's get away from psychology. Let's not go there.
All right, we'll find a definition for it then, and we'll talk about that one. I mean, it's eudaimonia is an emotion. It's so it's fine, whatever.
Eudaimonia is more of a state of what we would characterize as virtue and happiness, or like sometimes it's called like human flourishing, but it's more of an ongoing.
I would argue that we're not flourishing. No one here is flourishing based on pretty much obvious standards. Like you're all actually expiring, and you're eventually going to die. It's not like an actual state of flourishing. So
the state
there's a state of necessity that you have to fill in a deprivation from.
Yeah, the whole point of eudaimonia is that it's a state in which pain and pleasure has reached a point in which the pleasure and pain ratio of our lives has been balanced so fine-tuned that we reach a state of contentment.
Yeah, but look, I would argue that this state of contentment of desire, like this contentment with the states of pain and pleasure or something like that, even like isn't really contentment at all. It's just it's perpetual discontentment based on everything you're claiming.
But that's the whole thing. So what is making it discontentment? Tell me, like, what about desire that would force it to be discontentment? Like, why could I never have a content?
Just the strong point that I think I've been making this whole time, burning alive is catastrophically bad compared to, whatever. It's just by itself a pain. That's just one thing we could characterize as just being by itself a pain. Or like, for example, breathing water. Okay, we could use that one as well. I don't think this is an assumption at all. I think that any of these people you Google, if you go farther into this, you will see exactly what I saw. You'll see Buddhist people lighting themselves on fire and thinking that they can not feel pain, and they're just freaking absurd as hell, and they're running around screaming while they're on fire.
And ridiculous.
Look, it's not just ridiculous; it's fucking horrific. And that's why I don't like this, talking about this woo stuff. This makes me uneasy just even talking about it. I start to get flashbacks thinking about that shit, to be honest with you. So like, I understand
it's awful. It's awful stuff, and I wouldn't watch it myself for that reason, because I know it's going to be awful stuff.
I could use another example. I could use the example of I could use any example that I want. No, I could use the example as well of like. You can't breathe water, right? Like no one can breathe water, so that's a pain just by itself. You're not experiencing a well-being by breathing water.
It's not a pain by itself. What you're experiencing is a mediation of being, which has a positive and negative experience. Like the whole point is that there is an experience of good
what's
and
the positive
bad in our
experience?
lives.
What's the positive experience to drowning?
Well, as in like what we'd say, like as in like to. Like have you ever taken a deep breath and feeling satisfied and just had like, this is nice? Have you ever experienced any sort of well-being and control in your breathing and feeling that you're in a state of peace and calm, and that's a form of positive experience around that?
So you're not claiming that you should reach eudaimonia through any sort of mechanism of like drowning or being on fire or anything like that?
Oh dear God, no! Like absolutely not.
Okay, yeah.
No,
Look,
no.
I
It's
mean
not
that. So
mystic, man.
that's the
This is
point where you
philosophical.
disagree. I understand that. It's just like bottom line is like you do have to toil with these questions because the bottom line is I mean there is a
There
fact
is no
of these
Greek.
things
There is
existing.
no Greek. No ancient Greek that would have, or if there was, there would have probably been very strange. There was very
Well,
few
you
ancient Greeks
exist in
that
a
would
state
have.
of necessity. We agreed to that base axiom at the start. You exist in a state of necessity, where you. So that's just the bottom line. I mean, like, there's a state of necessity. You can't breathe water. You can't be burning alive, and that can't be indicative of your well-being, right? Like, it's not. It has
Yeah,
nothing
no,
to do with
I
well-being.
wouldn't deny. No, no,
Okay,
I do
so
agree.
so
Like, I
my
wouldn't
point is
deny
made
that.
then. My point
Yeah.
is just made. My point is made that there is no well-being
But
that
then
is
you're
by
saying that,
itself,
like,
and there are pains that are by itself. My point is made.
no,
So we could just
that's,
move on
you
to the
haven't
next
made the
thing.
point. You haven't made
Well,
that.
yes,
No,
I
that's
have.
not.
What are you talking
What
about?
you
I have
haven't.
not
You
made the
have.
point.
My
What
point
it's
was metaphysical, that pain and pleasure must exist within distinction of each other, otherwise they don't exist. Well, you have to say, like,
But we
really, the only
agreed
point. If I was to
a state of
steel man your
necessity.
argument,
That's not
yes,
a
like,
state
but
of
what I'm.
necessity. A state of necessity you're existing in. You agreed to the base axiom. It's a state of necessity. You're not existing in a state of metaphysical wooey, whether
No,
or
it's
not
not
you feel pain. I mean, it's
I don't
like
know what you think
it's
philosophy is, but the thing is
well,
that, like, the point is
even
that
if
when
we go, look, you could think that it's the most phantasmagorical thing that you want. Let's just go to
what the hell?
that. Let's go to
Right,
that.
like,
Let's go to that. What?
phantasmal,
Well,
man.
let's go to the most phantasmagorical metaphysics you could possibly come up with. Does it justify the worst? Does it justify
don't
the worst?
deny its
Does it
existence, you know.
just does it justify the worst things that you can come up with?
The point that I'm making,
I mean,
mate,
like
I don't
we're
think that
just
you're
we could just
dealing with.
go
You're
to a next
talking
thing. I think
over
I
it.
totally dealt with it
No,
100%.
you haven't. No,
It's been
no, you may
dealt
think
with.
that, but I inherently disagree.
Okay, well that's fine. You can inherently disagree about people holocausting animals too. Does that make holocausting animals all right? No, it doesn't. All right, so look. bottom
No,
line
so
is-
what it's based upon is, logical deduction, and this is what we'll have to talk about, which is
This
why
is
I would
logical
say
deduction. What I'm using
no,
is logical
no, you
deduction.
assert a claim, then you say it's true, and then I disagree, and you say fine, you can disagree.
No, you
but you're
agreed
wrong,
with me. A couple
and
minutes
then-
ago you agreed. So let's just focus for a second here. Do you-
I don't remember
Alright.
ever agreeing to.
There's no pain. Okay? So listen. There's no well-being that's by itself, and there is a pain that's by. There are pains that are by themselves. Would you agree with this? Yes or no?
So there are no pains that are. Wait, did you say that there are no? Because I would say that there are no pleasure or pains independent of each other. That pleasure and pain are not inherently independent of each other.
Okay. Well, then you
They may
have to
vary
give an
in-
example. Of,
No, that they may vary in form,
Okay.
but they are never independent of each other. You can always have a good or a bad experience that is in relation to the what it is to be a subject. It is a distinction. It is ability to qualify experience, and that is what it by definition you must experience to be a subject.
Unless look, we're talking about the mechanism of prevention. We're not talking about just an experience. I mean, we've already been over this a bunch of times, so I think we should just go on to the next stage.
I think the audience can decide from themselves, and obviously, like we disagree, which is fair enough.
fine.
And we can go on to the next bit.
All right. So the next bit I would argue is this. Just let's go into the fantasy realm of just anything you can come up with. Anything you can come up with. I think that if it can't even exist hypothetically, something that would justify what the worst things are hypothetically that can happen, then you don't even have a hypothesis for your position. This is as philosophical as it could possibly get. Just anything you could imagine. What would justify, what utopia would justify the worst possible dystopia, or the worst possible,
That's an
things that can happen to a
interesting
person.
hypothesis to endeavor to answer. But can I get back to that in 1 second? I just need the toilet really badly. So
Yeah, go for it.
if there's any chance that we could just like have a 2-minute break?
That's a good plan. I need to get some water too. I'll be right back,
Sweet.
chat and everybody. Okay. So, what's the chat saying? I had trouble following his argument. Yeah, it's well, obviously, embrace extinction. Well, look, I mean, I'm being totally sincere here. I mean, I understand what he's saying. But we're gonna go into the hypothetical realm now. If you can't make it happen here, where the fuck are you gonna make it happen? That's the question. So, in my opinion, right now, he's not making it happen based on anything we can understand logically, and based on just the facts of the questions that we're asking him here. So, basic state of necessity, he agreed to that. He's not naming a well-being that is by itself. It's exempt from pain, whether it be alleviating a pain or causing a pain. And then the pains there are pains that I can argue really confidently are just pains by themselves, and you're not experiencing any well-being associated with them. So that means that it's more painful or less painful while you're here. And so why the fuck would you do that? Why would you claim that there's some sort of net benefit to that? We already gave the math for this. Obviously, if you were to create a person who had, for example, cured cancer, would this, he said that would be a life worth living for sure, a life worth creating, specifically a life worth creating. We're talking about creating life, not suiciding life in the first, bit of this. Okay, so that's good to preface. But yeah. Okay, so the fantasy realm. Like, let's go into this thing. All right, so let's just go into the hypothetical wooey.
Okay, so why are we going? Well, wait a minute. So one, I'll have to ask. Like, what is it about my position that you think's fantasy and somewhat like abstract? Because I'm not.
It's
like
I just there's no. Like, if we're to draw this out on a piece of paper, I mean, it's just, if you just want to write it down, there's no well-being that you're naming that's by itself, that's exempt from pain.
But then I don't think there's any, no, but I said there is no such thing as pain and pleasure independent of each other metaphysically. So if you say
if you name, for example, love, you named earlier, I would argue it's an addiction and a state of dependence that you need. Like the love from your mother, you needed that to be able to feed you food, and that's a necessity, right? I mean, so look, food is a necessity. You live in a state of necessity. We agreed the base axiom was you think that there's a state of necessity that you could be deprived of ultimately, right? So it's just, so if we're going to hold logical consistency with that, I mean, obviously you're, making a malfunction here by claiming that there's some form of pain that there is a well-being that is not derived from a pain.
Well, you're saying like the direct derivative of a pain. Like I would say like if we look at, let's say, higher pleasures or something like that, they don't necessarily have to be directly derived from.
Like what? Name it specifically, please.
Like something like wonder. Let's say like
wonder. Okay, wonder. Yeah. So wonder is alleviating, in a lot of instances, a state of boredom, right? Like wanderlust. Okay, people travel for wanderlust.
Wonder might alleviate boredom, but you'd have to say that it inherently is derived because of a state of boredom. Like, because boredom exists, so does wonder. That is what you are propagating there.
Yes.
Yeah. Why? Why does that be the case? Because why would you say that? You couldn't feel, like, for example, I would say that having both allows you to have that distinction of pain and pleasure, which I've stated about 100 times. But I'm saying that what is it about
Say that wonder, last part again that you said 100 times. Say that again.
That there is that be able to feel both boredom and wonder, the feeling of hunger
I don't think
and
they're
being
separate.
well fed.
I'm just claiming that they're not separate. I think that you could easily be bored.
I agree, but I think that all pain and pleasure isn't separate. I think it is inherently subjectivity that we are describing here, a notion of positive and negative that need to be distinguished within the forms of experience in which we have. and that by
Okay,
experiencing
but
one or the
but
other
all I'm
would
saying,
not be would not.
literally all I'm saying is that it's just not occurring by itself. So you're not reliably naming something that is a well-being that is occurring by itself. And then I would argue that that there are things you could experience that are a pain that can be experienced by
But then you
themselves
just
as a pain.
but you just assert that there is a pain that can be experienced as a pain by itself. You don't actually.
Look, I mean, I'm sorry, this is why I think we should just move on to something else, because we already covered like why obviously like
Okay.
drowning
Well,
is a pain by itself. Like
it's not a pain by itself because otherwise you wouldn't be able to distinguish it from your normal everyday experience, would you?
it's a state of deprivation, okay, that you're filling in, right? Like
So if it's depriving
sorry.
you of something, so like for example,
no,
like
no.
this is
It's just
yeah,
it's just a state of necessity that you're being deprived of. It's
that's
different.
a different word, isn't it?
Yeah.
The point
Necessity.
like have you ever encountered
Well, that's the
you
axiom.
I don't know if you've ever encountered a philosopher called Augustine. So Augustine is faced with the problem of evil, for example, as a theologian, and he's thinking, how can I get over it? You know, like why would God create the notion of evil? Like why would evil exist if God exists? And he's trying to work it out, you know. And he says, well, perhaps evil is not evil, but is perhaps the privation of good. It's not a separate entity, but actually the lack of God. It's because God and good are synonymous, and so he says it's a privation. Well, what he's done is describe the exact same phenomenological experience of good and bad, but with different words, right? Like he's just said there is good and there is bad, but what he's actually said is that there is good and there isn't good, right? And what he's actually describing is a variation of experience, one positive, one negative, which gives distinction to both events. Now, that is what I'm saying occurs within all subjectivity. Otherwise, it wouldn't be subjectivity because you wouldn't be able to characterize it as being good or bad, right or wrong, that kind of scenario. There would be no positive or negative because they are the positive and the negative give each other meaning. They distinguish each other from the rest of our experiences. Like if you only saw in blue, there would be no such thing as red. And if you only saw in red, there would be no such thing as blue.
Oh,
You see what I mean?
all right. Yeah, this is just it
But then
doesn't matter.
there would
So
be
whether
no
or
such
not you
thing
think
as red either, because we have distinguished that there is nothing but that experience. We wouldn't even know, we wouldn't be able to say that this redness is anything in and of itself. It just is. It's something that it's not characteristic as being good, bad, or whatever. It is unable to be understood as being separate. We cannot formalize it.
so you're claiming that if I was to ask you, can you name the well-being that is not derived from a pain, you would claim that this is like claiming yellow is not blue?
No, I would say that if you were to
I
ask,
don't understand what you mean then.
so like what I'm saying is that if you were to say like name a well-being that is not derived, that is not in relation to a pain, because derived, I think, necessarily does not necessarily have to be the case. I don't think you derive all wonder from boredom. Like you don't necessarily have to be bored well before you feel wonder.
Let
You
me
could be having
rephrase
a
that. That's a
great time,
possible.
for example.
That's a possible outcome. Okay, there could also be other states of deprivation that are making you, want to have the state of wonder, lust, or
Well,
whatever.
it seems like you're doing
wanderlust.
what you're doing is exactly what Augustine's doing. You're saying that there is only bad. You're just reversing it. You're saying there is only bad and then a privation of badness. That's all you're saying.
Well, no, I'm just saying that there's a pure red. What Twisted Hippie just said. Like you're claiming that there's you didn't think that this is what you were saying earlier, but I thought you said this so like it's analogous with there being yellow is not blue, right? But or like if I'm claiming something like that, you said that that's not true, but that's actually not what I'm saying at the end of the day. I'm not claiming that it's yellow is not blue. I'm claiming that there is a pure fucking red. There's a pure pure states of negative that we avoid at all costs, and they are
But
the states of necessity that we fill in. Like for example, we breathe air, we don't breathe water. And do you think we breathe water? No, obviously we don't breathe water. Do you think we can survive in a state of 225 degrees Fahrenheit for very long? No, we can't, because our water is, we're made up of water. It's a boiling point. That's, it's much higher than the boiling point. So look, you just boil alive. So there's just plenty of states of just pure fucking one color. Like that's bad. Like it's gonna be painful.
No, but what you're describing is like for example, I can have an experience of red, okay, and I can understand that as an experience of red, just as I can have an experience of pain within my life. because I would have the same experience of red though, and I would understand it to be red. But that is definitely an experience of just redness. Okay.
Yeah.
And I would understand that because I've had experiences of variations of color which distinguish those colors from each other. Right. But let's say from birth, from the point of being, I only seen in red. Would I have an experience of red? No. I would have no understanding of it. There would be nothing to distinguish red. There would be no knowledge of red because there would be nothing to distinguish red from anything else. It would.
I think we have the bottom line here is that just what I'm claiming is that there is. I mean, I feel like a broken record here. Sorry, Chad. This is just the best way I've ever found to put it, so I just like to colloquially say it like this. There's other formal arguments that I made for this. There's other ways I put it, but I do like this one the most just because, look, I mean, I could find those other ones very quickly if you'd like as well. I could ask you it in that method if you'd like. Or do you think fundamentally it's just, can you name the well-being that is not sourced from a pain, right? And if there isn't one, then you are just.
No, but this is the thing. If I say a form of well-being that I would say is well-being in and of itself.
Name it. So please name one. So
do you mean no? But
it.
this is just
because we've talked about wonder so far. We've talked about love.
But you said okay. But you said let's say something like what I characterized as love, friendship, something like that. Let's say like friendship, and we were to say that like friendship is a good, right? Because it is ultimately an experience of value, which is a great positive to negative experience. That's what I would say a good is. I don't think that there is any indication of bad or good that is absolutely distinguished from all possible experiences of good and bad. Like they imply each other. Without it, there would be no knowledge to distinguish these things. This is what I'm saying, and I just don't understand why. Like, for example, like if you say derived, do you mean like could I have an experience without having had a prior experience? Well, yes, I think I could have an experience of. I think as I'm experiencing, I could have an experience of, let's say I taste a new food for the first time, and then I develop, because I've tasted that food, a craving for that food. Then I've actually arguably experienced the pleasure, and then that is forced a pain.
Well, no,
do you see what I'm saying?
I'm claiming. So you want to claim that that's the well-being then, the taste food?
No, like I don't think you see.
Well, look, derived is all I mean by derived is sourced from. It's just the definition of derived.
Yeah, like this is like I think Twisted Hippie said it there. Like I see your position kind of like a language game. There is a linguistic issue going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So
yeah. So you want to just define like all the terms so we don't have to have any language problems?
That would well, I don't think that necessarily. So, but I think the point is like we need to understand the concepts that are being conveyed, and to do that, like what we need to express to each other is, so if you mean derived, do you mean like I must feel pain before I can feel pleasure? I must be alleviating a pain to feel a pleasure. Is that what you're saying?
No, derived is just in the definition form of the word derived. Like derived means sourced from.
Yeah, so like as I must be alleviating a pain to feel a pleasure, would that be derived?
Not that you must be. You could be fucking up and causing a pain as well, and call that fucking well-being as well. If you're like fucking it up really badly. Like for example, people who say that they love eating animal products. Right, like well, they're not causing an alleviation of suffering.
Yeah, like I agree. Like you can be mistaken. Like I don't think that's. Like,
so it could be that either. So it's just sourced from a pain. So is it the name of the well-being that is not sourced from a pain?
But this is
whether
it
be avoiding the pain or causing the pain.
But I don't like. But this is the thing. Like what I'm trying to say is that when we experience a pleasure, is it always because we have experienced a pain, or can we experience a pleasure?
This person in the chat, really quick, cosmically insignificant, is saying, what about BDSM? BDSM is alleviating a state of boredom for most
Well, I
of
would
them,
say,
and then sometimes it's also filling in a state of like addiction to it as well.
I'd say that the point is that BDSM is in relation to a stance in which we have taken around a phenomenological experience. So, like pain, like for example, they probably still feel the quote unquote pain, the physical sensation of pain, but they have had a positive psychological sensation of pleasure, and that also then affects their physical sensation of pain, because then they would say that like the pain can then be the like for example it would increase blood flow and maybe enhance the sexual like performance of people and so on like that. So we could say that there is like mitigating factors in this, but the point of the point of BDSM is we characterize it as positive regardless of the physical pain being undertaken, so that there would be what it is a relationship with the phenomenological experience or the quality of pain, and that relationship has characterized it in such a way that it is now a positive experience.
Well, look,
And
I think we could have another conversation about qualia and stuff like that. I want to get into that in the future, like determinism versus free will and randomness and stuff like that in the future.
yeah.
Like like if we just sit here and talk about that right now, we're gonna go down a
Oh
totally.
no, I was just
different
answering
path.
that.
Yeah.
I was just answering that guy's question. It's just anyway, but I guess the point
Yeah.
of what I'm trying to say here is that
But, like,
you could
look,
experience a pleasure that you've never experienced. Like for example, you could experience a form of pleasure without having ever experienced a desire for it. Okay, and that once you experience this pleasure, then that will give you the urge for that pleasure, and now you've experienced the pain in relation for it. So I think that like obviously pleasure and pain are in relation to one another, that there is a state of satisfaction and deprivation, as you say, positive and negative, and it's a relationship.
well, actually, what I'm claiming is that it's okay. So the topic of the debate is just is having children selfish, and I think that there are no children that are in courts that are unborn that are saying that they want to be born, right? Like so. Bottom line is there's none of that being claimed. So all I'm claiming now is that from this point that it's neutral, right? Like from a state of negative, because that you there. I ask you the question: can you name the well-being that is not derived from a pain? You name wanderlust, it's boredom, right, or some form of alleviating a state of deprivation. If there's a deprivation to be alleviated, or to be caused, then by so it's not, then that means that it's not a well-being that's by itself, and that's all I'm claiming, is that there's no well-beings that are by themselves, and that there are pains that are occurring by themselves, right? So like there's like we've already gone over it, but there's states of necessity, like for example eating food, that if you're deprived of that you die. There's there's states of you have to breathe air, not water. There's states of you have to experience a relatively similar temperature to your blood temperature, otherwise you will die. Like if it's high temperatures, 200 degrees Fahrenheit, 212 degrees Fahrenheit, the boiling temperature of water. So look, you're not going to survive at that temperature. Okay, so it's just bottom line red there. And then for this well-being thing, it's just never by itself without being attached to either A, alleviating a pain, or B, causing a pain, fucking it up worse, causing colossally more pain and anguish, right? So I asked you at the beginning if you valued a necessity. Like,
Is this are these closing statements now? Or?
No. I'm not making closing statements. I'm down to talk for as long as you want, man. I'm here for a while for sure. So I'm
probably gonna have to go like somewhat soon. How long has it been going? It's been like
it's been like
about an hour.
it's been 2 hours and 3 minutes. So
2 hours and 3 minutes. Yeah, I'm probably gonna have to go within the next, let's say, 10 minutes or so.
Okay.
If that's all right. It's just obviously
I understand, man. It's so like I would like to get into the even in the most imaginative realm you could possibly get to, I don't think that there's anything that, even if we grant your position of like this, whatever, utopia, euphoria, what was it called again? Eudaimonia? Is that what it's called? I learned a new word from this, at least. Eudaimonia?
Eudaimonia, yeah.
Eudaimonia, yeah. Like, even if we get to this eudaimonia thing, does it justify the worst possible things that can happen? So, like, I would just say absolutely not. So, in order to risk those things, you'd have to be justifying those worst possible things.
So what you would say is that, like, the risk would be too great.
Yes.
In relation to the likelihood of pain.
Yes.
And the likelihood of pleasure.
Yes.
So what if I was to say that? So I would have to have a good reason to
not just the likelihood. I'm claiming that we have more of a value to reduce pain than we do have a value to increase pleasure.
I see what you're saying there. I'm not even entirely against that notion. I think that the reduction of pain takes priority for the most part in ethics. But I would say that the likelihood certainly does hold precedence, because if I could have, let's say, for example, absolute knowledge that they weren't going to be set on fire, well, then I wouldn't have to worry about that pain at all, would I? So what we're talking about is that, of course, probabilities matter in this case, like when it comes to moral hazard, because the probabilities of any hazard matter. For example, the probability of me...
I would say if we're going to use hypotheticals in the most realistic sense, like in even just not just realistic, in the most hypothetical sense. If we're going to use hypotheticals for what they're supposed to be used for, which is just anything you can imagine, I don't think you have something that is the best thing that can happen that justifies the worst things that can happen.
But I think if I understand you correctly, you're coming from a position in which you assume that the positive and negative experiences of an individual before they are born hold equal likelihood, and so the moral risk is weighting between the negative value versus the positive value in respect to each other, rather than necessarily taking into account that...
It's just about justification. So if you want to, you said you only have 10 minutes left, but do you want to get into this? So just name whatever utopia. Describe what it is.
No, but this is what I'm trying to understand your position, mate. So, like, what I'm saying is that I think that you, and tell us if I'm wrong. So I think that what you're saying is that we come from a 50-50 chance of having, let's say, having a life of pain and suffering, or a life of, good and... Well, I don't even think you'd probably say that, but let's say there was a 50-50 chance of...
I'd pick neutral.
Okay, right, that's... Yeah. I think that's what you... Like, well, okay, we'll get on to that in a second.
I'd pick neutral. I'd pick prevent it all completely, because why would I want to toil with the possibility of the worst things? There's no reason to do that, when I could just totally erase it by just pressing the neutral button. I'd press neutral.
But this is the thing. So what you're saying is that would any possibility, what I'm going to ask you is, any possibility of pain neutralize any possibility of pleasure?
Well, we're talking about whether or not they come into existence in the first place or not. So there's no children. The main point that we made at the beginning is just...
But just do us the courtesy and answer on that. Like, would you say that when we, like, for example, if I was to risk 10 pence to win 100 million, whatever, would you say that the risk of losing the 10 pence was worth the gain of 100 million?
Okay, right, but this all goes back to the fact that it's just not analogous with what we're claiming here
for
preventing life, right? It would be more like preventing the need for the 100 million in the first place. I would prevent the need for the $100 million in the first place.
No, but the point of what I'm saying is that it's not necessarily, like, if we're looking at it like this, we are either acting in the interests of the individual, or we are talking about the balance of suffering.
It all comes down to whether or not you value prevention or not.
It's not about, you don't just value prevention. This is the point, and I think this is...
Some
like,
people do.
No, they don't. No.
Some people value
then
preventing pain.
So should I... what if I... I look at it like this. Can I value preventing prevention? So if someone's going to prevent something and I prevent it, have I, done something, like, good? Like, you know what I mean? Like, if we leave it into, like, an absurdity there, like...
Well, I'm
like
just
prevention. It's
specifically preventing pain. Causing pain is bad. Preventing pain is good. But you don't agree to this base axiom.
that causing pain is bad and that preventing pain is good. Mainly because of the definitions of pain that we're using, like pain and pleasure.
But
So
the
it depends
definitions of pain are just, I mean, you aren't naming a well-being that isn't derived from a pain, so there's nothing really to define as being at other than pain that you're experiencing, other than just alleviation of pain. So alleviation of pain or more pain is what we're talking about at the end of the day. But then even if we grant the fantasy world things and
But I don't
just
see.
go
So
as
how,
far as we
so,
possibly
so
can
you
in the
think,
hypothetical,
so,
I think
so
you
do you
still
think
lose.
that I would, so you think that I must be in a state of perpetual boredom, otherwise I wouldn't be able to experience something like wonder or curiosity or um
Yeah, and I'm saying those things
amazement or
don't
awe.
matter.
So
I'm saying those things don't matter compared to preventing suffering. I would prevent the suffering. I would press the button that prevents the suffering.
I'm not comparing like looking at the stars to setting someone on fire, man.
Well,
like,
I mean, that's what you're toiling with by bringing a person into existence.
no,
The risk of both of those things. I mean, it's a valid point. What I'm claiming is a valid point.
Risk is always dependent upon probability, is what I'm saying. And what probability do I have to expect that my
And I would
future
pick neutral.
future
I'd pick zero.
progeny?
I'd pick zero. I'd pick zero because I don't want to risk anything for them because I don't think I have.
But, okay,
I would be a risk averse. I view as being an adult, a risk averse adult by not risking everything for somebody that I don't even know, that I can't even consult.
What I'm asking you is that form of reasoning applicable to all decision-making processes? So we shouldn't take risks if they invoke any likelihood of negative.
Look, the bottom line is you have to toil with every single possible negative. It's not just like you're just claiming, like you have to toil with all of them.
The whole point is that everything is a mediation of risk, right? Like we are trying to mediate probability. We exist in a state of perpetual probability, right? And like for example, I would most likely agree with you, but like your assumption that you're going to enter a neutral state when you die, there's people that would claim that wouldn't be the case.
No, that's not the case. But if you got rid of 100% of it, it would be the case.
No, I'm talking about people who would see an afterlife, not me, but talking about
look,
people
even the people that would see an afterlife.
Or
we can get
the
into the fantasy
inevitability
realm.
of existence, like for example,
even people who would see an afterlife. Even people who would see an afterlife, we could talk to them about this. Okay, so would you toil with the possibility of your child? Let's say you are hypothetically a Christian. Okay, you're not a Christian,
right?
Are you a Christian?
I'm not. No,
okay.
No, I'm not Christian.
Let's just say hypothetically, if you were a Christian, okay, and you had to toil with the possibility of your child burning in hell for eternity, possibly, or going to heaven to be with God for eternity. Which one would you pick? Non-existence, so the neutral state from those two things?
Well, I would say. I mean, my first criticism would be that hell is an inherent unjust concept in and of itself, and I'd have a problem with Christianity for that.
Yeah, but look, we're talking about the hypothetical realm.
Infinite amount of torture for a finite amount of crime seems somewhat
it's
unjust.
Absurd. It's absurd. But all I'm asking is, like, if you're a Christian, and would you toil with your child potentially burning in hell for eternity?
No, but if I was a Christian, then I'd already believe that my child is somewhat is depending on the Christian. I could be waiting for its ensoulment, in which the child already exists. I don't agree with that. But like the point of what I'm stating is that within all of our processes, in our logical deduction or deductive processes, there's this possibility that we could be wrong, that we aren't gauging the probabilities of everything correctly. And what we actually do with reason is balance the likelihood of a certain scenario which we have judged to be better or worse. And what you're doing in this...
That's what I'm using, is reason alone.
Yeah, and what I'm saying is that you're saying that the value of prevention, which is a disposition to risk,
preventing pain.
Preventing pain.
Yes, causing pain is bad. Preventing pain is good.
Okay, yes. So let's say the value of the
Totally,
prevention of
I think that's
pain.
reasonable. I think most people hold that
Yeah,
value.
yeah. But let's say that was absolutely the case, then we could say that we should not take any risks that could ultimately lead to any pains, no matter the positive outcome.
Say that one more time. Sorry.
So then we wouldn't say that there was any pain worth undertaking for the positive outcome of, or the possible positive outcome. So we wouldn't say that there is an amount of pleasure that might be worth any amount of pain. That's what you would be assuming there within that process.
Look, what we have to work with is the worst things. So you got to work with the worst things that can happen if you're going to risk people to the worst things that can happen. And I would argue that those things happen to people just by default. You're in a state of deprivation from the time that you're born. It's a state of necessity. We agreed to the base axiom since you didn't want to agree that causing pain.
So like what we would say,
it's fine. We agreed to the base axiom being that they are born into a state of necessity, right? Like a state of prerequisite, essential requisites, fundamental, basic needs that they have. Like for example, breathing air instead of breathing water. So what gives you the right to impose that on somebody? Yeah. So what gives you the right to impose that on somebody is my question. When they don't, there's nobody asking. I would
also say like, because suffering is inevitable, then I would say pleasure is inevitable.
Yeah, but we asked you, can you name the well-being that is not derived from a pain?
And then we got onto the metaphysical argument.
No, it's not a metaphysical argument.
We move past that. Now we're on to the point of like whether it is.
You think that some of these things are read by themselves. You think that that there's necessities, there's states of necessity that you have to avoid.
I never said that. I never said that.
The base axiom. I mean, the base axiom is the state of necessity. If you agree to a state of necessity, then a fundamental basic need, then you agree that there's problems. I mean, obviously you agree that there's
I agree that suffering exists. That's when I agree. Like it's inevitable, that it's unavoidable.
Yeah, that's what I'm claiming.
Why would you? I also said that pleasure is inevitable and unavoidable.
But we're not defining this well-being or pleasure thing just as anything that's occurring by itself. So it's just really just a pain. So it's not.
Well, neither of them are occurring by themselves. That's what I'm saying.
It's something alleviating a pain. But yes, the pain is occurring by itself. I'm arguing that the pain is occurring by itself.
But you've not stated in what way a pain would be distinguishable
because there's fundamental, basic fucking things that you require. Like, for example, not burning alive. Because you require a certain temperature. Not having no. Hold on. Not being able to breathe air. You can't breathe air. I mean, sorry. You can't breathe water. You can't breathe water, right? Like you can't breathe water instead of breathing air. You can't. Like these are requisite things. These are prerequisite things, essential requirements, indispensable things for the beings that exist. Otherwise, they are having pain caused to them. So, look, there's pain by itself, and there isn't well-being by itself.
I don't think you believe in pleasure at all. That's what I've kind of.
Well, I think that the pleasure. I think that it just doesn't exist by itself. I just don't think that it exists by itself.
So you believe it's the privation of pain?
Privation of pain? Privation. What does that mean? I'll look it up.
Like as in lack of.
Privation, a state of no. I'm not claiming it's just the lack of pain. No. This is what Ask Yourself and Vegan Gains were trying to do. Okay, no, I'm not claiming it's just the lack.
I didn't watch Ask Yourself's part of the discussion. I only seen about 20 minutes of Vegan Gains, so I have no idea what they've said.
Okay, well the Vegan Gains part was much better than the Ask Yourself part, but the Ask Yourself part went fine for me.
That's typical.
It went fine for me. It went fine for me though either way, because he wasn't answering the questions like that at all that I was posing, and I wasn't claiming the things that he was claiming ultimately that I was. So
yeah, that's
right. And we already just highlighted it. So I'm not claiming that it's the lack, but you're sort of claiming that same thing right now. You're claiming that I'm claiming that somehow well-being is merely the lack.
Well, it might be a problem in the way that the argument's coming across then.
Yeah. Well, look, but I'm not claiming that at all. I'm not claiming that it's just merely the lack of pain.
So if it's
I'm
an
claiming that it's
independent
not occurring
experience.
by itself. It's just not occurring
but
by itself.
I
Well-being
don't
is not
think-
occurring by itself. It's not an independent experience.
I
Pain is
don't
occurring
think
by
there
itself.
is an independent experience. That's what I've just said. I don't think there is one. I think they happen
You don't think
within
okay.
respect for each other.
Well, then we'll just have to disagree on that particular.
That's
area.
fine. Like,
That's
and
fine.
but like
I mean,
when I'm
but, like,
talking, but then like if we just move back to the concept of moral hazard in the risks that we take, what I would say is that our reasoning, like for example, there's a like, and it sounds kind of like the type of reasoning that you're undergoing is kind of like Maximin reasoning, which is a proposed kind of reasoning from a man called John Rawls, in which he says what we do is try to maximize our minimum. And what he's saying is that, like, for example, the minimum scenario, what you'd be saying is that the minimum scenario for a being not existing is absolute neutral. Well, the minimum scenario for a being that exists is absolute negative.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. Now,
Well, like, I mean, it's like, look, I mean, if there was going to be something that's absolute, it would be this, yeah. Because I mean, I don't hear the people petitioning to be born, and I don't hear them petitioning to not be born. All I see is that there's a self, and that the self wants to bring people into existence and call it not selfish. And I think, quite frankly, that's absurd, because I've already clarified that they can't hear a being that wants to be born or doesn't want to be born. So I think it's a state of neutral, and then I think that it's a state of negative, because we can't derive a well-being from anything that isn't a pain, whether it's avoiding a pain or causing a pain. And then there are pains that are just by themselves. They're just red. They're just a one fucking color bad thing that is called a deprivation of something that you absolutely fucking need. Like, for example, whether or not you eat food. You absolutely need to eat food. If you're deprived of food, you die. If you're deprived of, breathing air, you die. If you're deprived of, not just die, you feel pain. You feel excruciating pain from these things.
yeah. I guess my point is that, like, if we look at, like, the concept of moral hazard, which is around the decision-making process, and if you're using a state of Maximin reasoning, which I think you are, then what I would say is that you're already, by assuming that type of reasoning, you've already assumed the conclusion that you wish to reach, and actually it's a self-fulfilling form of reasoning. So it's actually an implicit assumption within your reasoning. So what you're saying is that it is better to avoid pain, to maximize the minimum, than to achieve a greater overall amount of pleasure. And what it is that you've already deduced that there is a value relationship which is better, and therefore we should seek to achieve within your reasoning. And so your reasoning is bias.
Well, that's why I'm asking you. That's why I'm asking you to name whatever the well-being is. Look, that's why I'm asking you to name. So far we named love. I showed you how that's an addiction. You could be deprived of love, and it's an addiction. So far we named wonder. That's a state of boredom that you could be trying to alleviate for the reason why you're want to experience boredom. Experience wonder. Look, there's always if you could be deprived of the thing, it's a state of deprivation.
Yeah, so like what you're saying is that deprivation is bad, but then you're not saying that alleviation is good. Do you see what I'm saying? So what you're assuming is that
I am saying that it's good. It's just the bottom line is at the end of the day, it's like it's desirable because all it is alleviating a pain.
But then you're saying all it is alleviating the pain. Well,
Like,
I would say that a deprivation is bad only because it is not achieving the pleasure.
I would accept the $1,000 for a pinprick. It's disanalogous with what I'm claiming, though, because at the end of the day, I'm claiming about prevention, a mechanism of prevention for the unborn, not a mechanism of good and bad just by itself.
But what you're saying is that neutrality, for example,
that it's good to prevent things. That's all I'm saying.
Would you say that if you could guarantee that? But that's the thing. But would it be good to prevent things in general? So if I could guarantee that someone was live a happy life, would it be better to prevent?
General. It's good to prevent pain.
Okay, so let's say I could prevent pain. So if I could guarantee that someone would live a happy life with some pain in it, but it was overall a positive life, would you say that it would be better having prevented that life?
Yes, because it's a state of necessity. They actually live in a state of necessity. They don't exist in a state of. I mean, I would obviously preventing their life would be better in every instance because they exist in a state of necessity where they can be deprived of that necessity. Okay, they can be that can be taken away from them. For example, we've already given what like you need to experience a certain temperature. You need to experience a certain.
But
You need to
but then
experience
okay,
a certain state of air that you ingest. Like, do you think that
is
somebody
it
can just
so
choose to breathe water?
that's what I'm saying. There's two propositions
Oh
that
no!
I'm
Oh
trying to
wait,
tackle
hold
here.
on, hold on. It's doing the
So that you're
voice
trying
thing
to.
again.
No, really, is it for God's
Yeah,
sake?
yeah. Fuck. Oh man. Hold on, I'll call you right back so that we can. Hold on. Yeah, sort it out really quick. Can you hear me? Are you there? I can't hear you right now. Apparently, it's your microphone. I don't know. Can you guys hear him? You can hear him right now? I can't even hear what he's saying. Okay.
Hello?
Yeah, yeah. All right, great. Excellent. Now it's fixed.
Yeah. So yeah, there's two things that I'm trying to look. That I think 2 points you're making. So one is the point about moral hazard, and two is the point about the ability to live a positive life. And I think that obviously they're interlinked
No,
clearly
no,
because
no, no. No,
if you couldn't
there'd
live a
be another
positive,
one. There'd be another one if you want to add this one on there. It's also an
okay.
imposition. It's an imposition to bring a person into existence. Like, what gives you the right as well? What gives you the right to bring them into existence?
Well, I think that the point, like, you kind of made the point in the first place that we can't act in reference to the individual that isn't created. I mean, like, what would, like, for example, like, you could kind of like look at it like this. Well, what gives someone the right to deny someone the the fulfillment or the whatever it is of the desire to have children? Like the whole point is that both are positive states in which you can bring someone into the world, and the states of liberty and not one. They both have outcomes, and it's weighing which outcome is necessarily better or worse.
I am paying attention to what you're saying. However, the microphone is doing the Darth Vader thing again. I don't know why. I can't hear you now. No one. We can't hear you. Can you
Hello?
guys hear? Oh, there
Can
we
you hear
go.
us?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is
Go
it
ahead.
better again?
Yeah. Yeah. That's excellent now.
I don't know what's going on. It may be the cable or something. Anyway, the point I'm getting at is that okay. So I'd like to think I've dealt with that there, but like so the other two were well-being
Wait. What? Wait.
of
No.
a
Wait.
be
You dealt with the. You think that you dealt with the point of the imposition?
yeah,
Well,
I think so.
how do you think you dealt with that point? Please explain.
So what we would be saying is that there is consequences to actions, and what we are weighing up is whether the respect of one person's liberty to act in such a way is overtaken by the perhaps the because you can't really defy. You see, because it's quite a difficult one because it's not an imposition because you can't impose something upon. You're not really imposing anything upon someone that is imposed by nature itself. You are facilitating a natural occurrence which then creates a being. You don't impose their life. Um,
Well, no, I would
but
claim that it's like, look, you are the only self that can make the decision, right? So
but regardless, let's say if you were to impose a life upon someone, like what's wrong with imposing something upon? Like for example, if I impose broccoli on my 3-year-old, like there's nothing wrong with that.
you have a child.
Like, no, I don't. I'm
Oh,
just
okay.
saying,
Sorry.
like, thank God for that.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
uh,
It always sucks. But it's just like, but look, like the bottom line is like, uh, the the only thing that I'm claiming is that there are no stadiums, there are no unborn people talking to me right now. There never will be. I can't conceive of any of you speaking with some unborn children, and asking them whether or not they want to be born. So there's just no way that it could be anyone's decision other than my own or
Yeah, I agree.
person's. Yeah, so like we agree on that. So I mean, that's obviously that would be an imposition. That would be.
I think like this is the point though. It's like what I was trying to work out there would be whether you're actually imposing, like whether, because if you impose a good on someone, you're not doing them a disservice. That's a good imposition. Imposing is not necessarily bad.
Okay, yeah, and then this is where the point of can you name the well-being that isn't derived from a pain? So we are existing in a state of necessity. We agreed to the base axiom was that we do agree that.
So we've kind of overcame the third one, that of it being an imposition, because we're saying, okay, well, that whether it's a good or a bad imposition is what now we need to discuss. So now we'll move on to part 2.
Well, you don't think that a state of deprivation you think that a state of deprivation can be a good thing?
Well, I think that we can exist in both positive and negative within our experiences. Yes,
do
whether
you
it's
think
an
that a state of damaging lack of material benefits,
but you
material
can
and cultural
have,
benefits, can be.
Well, I'm saying that you can have an experience of deprivation and alleviation. You can have an experiences of good in itself and bad in itself, and that they are two reference points of experience.
But they're not separate.
Pleasure.
We know that they're not separate.
No,
we know that good is not separate from bad. We know that
good, but they have to be linked in all to have any understanding.
But that's all I'm claiming is that they don't occur by themselves. So well-being doesn't occur by itself. I feel like a broken record here, but well-being doesn't occur by itself, and without whether it's alleviating a pain or causing a pain. And then that was a ferocious puppy. Yeah, I feel that right there. Sometimes my dogs bark like crazy at stuff, and then they get all crazy, and I have to be like, just settle down, you know.
You gotta like, he goddamn hates the postman and stuff, you know.
Yeah,
I don't know.
He's defending the house. He's being a good dog.
He's just being a good man. Yeah. But anyway, so we would say that pain and pleasure are intermingled, intertwined, cannot be divorced from one another.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. I don't
being like
that.
The only thing the pleasure is doing is either alleviating a pain or causing a pain, and that's what people apply this pleasure thing to causing a pain. Hold on. Sometimes they say they have a pleasure for eating animal products, right? Like, or they have a pleasure for just whatever. Bullying other people or something like that, or a pleasure, like ask yourself. For example, he has a pleasure. He could derive some sort of pleasure from only asking questions and never asking himself. That's why his name is Ask Yourself, right? He doesn't ask himself anything.
I'd probably agree that.
It's ridiculous. It's totally ridiculous. So look, I mean, the pleasure is always just derived from a fucking a state of trying to avoid a pain or causing a pain, and it's never doing something by itself. So why do we distinguish between this thing and anything else? We wouldn't, right? Like, we would just have the base axiom that causing pain is bad and preventing pain is good.
Well, like,
because there are, and then I can make the argument that there are pains.
Shall we make our closing statements, and then that'll.
Yeah, go for
just
it.
because I'm gonna have to go.
I thought it was a good conversation, man. I was being as patient as I could. Hopefully I wasn't trying to be rude or anything when I was talking about the Darth Vader thing.
No, it's okay.
I was just having a bit of fun with the I think the mic was just fucking.
No, it's apparently it was messing up, so it's all right. Like, if it is robot and like going all like. Funny in that I think more of the fact, like, it was when you kind of accused us of trying to lower my voice and to try and gain like some
I
didn't
know whether it was that or not. I had no idea, but like I know that I was just joking around with you.
That's fair enough, man. Like, that's fair enough. So like closing statements.
I'm being totally sincere. Let's do this again in the future, please, because we didn't get to all of the points at the end of the day. Okay, like, if we want to get to all of the points, we definitely should. But these are I think I made the fundamental points. We'll end with our closing statements. If you want to go first or after me, whatever you want.
I'm happy to do either. I'll just go first, and we can see if that's the best way to do it. So essentially, I would say that from your position, from what I understand, holds to that it is a moral hazard to birth a child because it is a unjust position or a selfish position. It's a position that doesn't characterize the potential harms that could happen to the child, and that, in fact, a state of neutrality would be more just. Now, what I would say is that there is a few problems with the position that you are kind of perpetrating. So the first one is about the idea of an imposition. I would say the imposition can either be good or bad, and it being an imposition does not necessarily entail that it is a negative. So what we would say is that we need to now consider the value of the child's life. So we're going to two, whether it can have a good or bad experience. What is it that we are risking? And I would say that we are risking either a positive or negative experience between like one child, but also overall like children in the future and overall humanity. So we'd say that can this child live a good and happy life? And what is the probability of it living a good or happy life? Now, you're saying that I think from what I've characterized of your position is that all states of well-being are actually derivatives of states of pain, and that all there is an alleviation of a deprivation rather than an actual positive experience in and of itself. When I would characterize it actually as two separate states, one which implies the other, and the positive and the negative are intertwined within a relationship, which can, one is not a privation of the other, but they're actually two separate phenomenological states of being. In which case you can have a state of pleasure, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you are relieving a state of pain. It is a state of pleasure, but then that also may cause a state of pain, in which case you wish to have that pleasure once more. So the relationship is still there, but one cannot be defined without the other. And I think what you try to do is define life as inherently painful, and so the risk is higher. So then we move on to three, the moral hazard. Is it worth taking a risk then, in which case of risking any pain for pleasure? So if we cannot decide whether life is going to be more pleasurable or more painful, which I think it's difficult to do, but let's say we're to decide that a child would live a better life than a worse life, then what I would say is that we should have that child, or like if it overall impacts the world in a better way, because overall the greater happiness has increased, and it's better to create good than have no good at all. It's overall a greater positive value. Just as we shouldn't have a child if it is going to be a greater negative value. Now, what you proposed is a maximin form of reasoning in which understands that a negative experience should be avoided at all costs, because if we were to say that the negative experiences of an individual are the minimum of experience, and on the other hand, not experience is the alternative, then we should say that we should avoid the negative. That the overall minimum would be to avoid the negative, but that ultimately is a form of bias, cognitive bias, which is impacted your form of reasoning. You've already assumed the risk scenario that is worth undertaking, whether that a minimum is always worth it's always worth avoiding the minimum than reaching the maximum, for example. And that's what it is. It's a form of rational bias. And I think that Robert Nozick points that out to counteract John Rawls' argument on a very similar cognitive bias in relation to maximin reasoning in his book Anarchy, State and Utopia. Also, another philosopher called Alistair McIntyre points that out in a book called Whose Justice and Which Rationality, where he criticizes liberal thinking for holding a similar value set. So, to summarize, I would say that your position, although holding value, and I do think that we should question ourselves as whether we should have children, how many children we should have, whether we should create a better society before we even think about having children, that I would disagree with the premise that it's inherently selfish to have children, because there can be a good motivation, good being objective from the individual in relation to the experiences of humans and future progeny, as you say, which would be the derivative of value being positive, and that this would be a selfless decision, or at least a eudaimonic decision, in which we could say that we are considering the value of everyone. So I hope that clarifies my position.
Okay. Cool. All right. So my closing statements will be everything I started out with. Obviously, I think still holds consistent at the end. There is a fundamental imposition being made in that you can only select the self yourself. in order to make the decision to bring a child into existence, or the other people, meaning that it would be selfish because there are no children asking to be born. There are no courts of unborn children asking to be born. So this would be an imposition just based on that. It would be selfish just based on that, inherently selfish based on that. And in regards to him claiming whether or not it would be good or bad, or a net good or a net bad to bring them into existence, can you name the well-being that is not derived from a pain? He named love. He named, which is an addiction or a a dependence of some kind that you have to feel in a state of deprivation from. He named wonder, which is a boredom, or an addiction that you have to feel in a state of deprivation from. These things are not well-beings by themselves. And then by contrast, I would argue there are plenty of things that are from a state of fundamental necessity. By necessity, you need to avoid them. Like, for example, you have to avoid hunger, so you have to eat food, so that makes that an addiction. You have to breathe air, so rather than breathing water, you don't just choose whether or not you do one or the other. So this causes a huge problem as well. There's obviously states of necessity, states of deprivation that are just a state of pain if caused. And then there, by contrast, all of the well-beings, love, wonder. What were some of the other ones we named? Somebody named, there were a bunch of other ones people named. They were always something they're never something that's just a well-being by itself, and there are pains by themselves. So we didn't get to go into the even hypothetical realm, which would totally, I think, when he's claiming this maxi-min reasoning thing that I'm claiming, it would just ice out any biases that can be claimed, because we could even go into the most hypothetical territory you'd ever want to get to, and I think you still don't justify the worst things, which we could possibly do in a future debate if you'd like. Hopefully you don't think I'm being uncharitable to you in this debate at all. I don't think you do. I allowed him to, we talked plenty, both of us talked plenty. I really don't have much more to say other than, so also I think that the average person values the axiom causing pain is bad and preventing pain is good. He doesn't value that because he claims a more nuanced position of good and bad. But I think that at the end of the day, when you figure out that these things are a necessity, you have to, they're not something that's that's optional for the beings that get born. Then you realize that you're actually just creating a need that doesn't even need to exist, and is just prevented if it's just not even born through the act of prevention, right? Like, he doesn't value, he claims not to value the act of prevention, but I would claim that preventing pain being good, but I would claim he's contradicting himself by the mechanisms of his whole channel with veganism and everything like that. Obviously, causing pain is bad for the animals, and preventing the pain for the animals would be good. So by the action of them not coming into existence, their pain would be prevented. So it's through prevention. It's not whether or not there can be a good or a bad. I don't think that there's a good or a bad. I think that it's a state of neutral, but I think that it's better never to have been because of the mechanism of prevention, and that's what he doesn't agree with, preventing pain specifically. But I think he's contradicting himself on a lot of levels. All right, so I know I'm forgetting something, but I think that's the primary points that I wanted to claim.
Yeah. Well, I think it's been a good debate anyway, mate. And thanks for having us on the channel. Next time, obviously, come on my channel. And, thank you for everyone for watching. It's been really interesting. Thank you for, letting us know that me vocals were messing up and, all of that. And it's very important that we have these kind of conversations in general to work out, what kind of lives that we live. And I think that the value of ethics cannot be understated. So, again, thank you very much, Superhumandance. I'm not sure what your name is. What's your name?
You could call me Greg if you'd like.
Greg. Well, thank you very much, Greg, and thank you to the audience. And I hope everyone has a lovely day.
As well. Have a good one.
Bye.
Have as least bad of an evening or afternoon or morning or whatever it is, wherever you are. I guess I can respond to the chat a little bit. What did you guys think? I mean, I was just trying to be as cordial and allowing as much time for him to talk as he wanted or needed. And I think it went pretty well. Thanks again, everyone. Take it easy. Yeah, well, yep. Have a good one, man. So, what did you guys think? I think we should do that again in the future. Yeah, good game. GG, says Mark, says GG. Good game. Yeah, thank you guys for listening. And I'm sure we'll do it again in the future. We'll do another one where we talk about, just go into the hypothetical realm. Because, I mean, if you even go... I mean, we could just get as unbiased as you could possibly conceive of. We could grant him anything he could come up with, in my opinion. And it doesn't justify the worst things you can come up with. So even if you're going to claim that I'm using this Maximin reasoning thing, I just don't think that it's ultimately reasonable, because I don't have any biases here. I'm totally open to every reason possible, even if it is you think you're a Christian person or something and you think that this heaven thing justifies the hell thing, which I don't think it does. So I think that you would be better off leaving your children in a state of neutral from that. Okay, and I don't believe in any of that stuff, but even if I'm just saying if I did, I wouldn't want to toil with the possibility of my children burning in hell for eternity, okay? So, yep. All right, so, yeah. All right, we'll do another debate on that type of thing in the future, maybe. I mean, hopefully, if he wants to. And, to show that I'm not being biased here, I'm not being I don't think that anything that I'm claiming is bias. And yeah, I don't think that this is the Maximin principle at all, really. Economic and social inequalities, I mean, I don't think that this life thing is justified for anybody. I think that everyone has catastrophic lives. Okay, I don't think anybody has anything that can be even called remotely productive in terms of a life for the vast majority of people, unless they are an efilist or an antinatalist that is by proxy preventing all the mechanisms. We also talked about preventing all the mechanisms of pain that could occur. For example, we talked about curing cancer. He didn't make a really solid rebuttal to that, I didn't think. That even if one of your future progeny cured cancer, you still wouldn't be preventing as much pain and suffering as if that you just didn't bring people into existence in the first place via the mechanism of prevention. So 2,000 years in the future, that's 1 million people based on the averages of 2 people reproducing each. That's 1 million people that never suffer from cancer. What else are you going to do over the course of your life? That's also 1 million people that never suffer poverty. That's 1 million people. That's 1 million people that never suffer carnism. They never get confused and eat animal products. So there's nothing I'm ever going to do, or that anyone else watching this is ever going to do, that's going to justify when I didn't understand whether or not I should eat animal products or not, and and by proxy, that's what happens when you buy those things. You pay for the torture of the pigs and the cows and the chickens. Okay, so look, I mean, all of that would be prevented as well, so you wouldn't even have to toil with that. We didn't even really get into that, you know what I mean? So, because he wanted to talk more about other stuff, so, which is fine. It's just that, look, I think that these arguments are, to say they're strong is an understatement. I don't think that there's really any way. I haven't heard any persuasive arguments against these arguments. I'm open to what people want to claim, even in the most hypothetical realm you could possibly imagine, the most phantasmagorical things you could come up with. We could grant your position and ask you if it justifies the worst things that we could come up with, or we could, and it never seems to, by any rational standards. No one ever stays consistent. Viking Gaines couldn't stay consistent. He answered he stayed consistent with burning alive for eternity, which I thought was crazy. And then he also but then he contradicted himself with being molested for eternity, which I thought was in the first debate that we did, which I thought was peculiar, because why would you justify, being burned alive for eternity? I'm not insinuating anything, but I mean, obviously, like, burning alive for eternity would suck. So, all right, I think that is good enough for now, and thank you all for listening. I guess I'll read over what is being claimed here a little bit. Superhumandance, did you sleep after the stream earlier? No, I did not, Neil. That's why I was a lot more calm probably in this one, to be honest with you. I wasn't able to, like, have, horrible daymares of, people burning alive and stuff like that from the internet, you know what I mean? Like, just other catastrophic things like that, because I'm too tired. It's like being drunk almost when you're too tired. But in my first debate with Vegan Gains, I was actually way too tired as well. But it doesn't matter. I can still make the rational arguments for anyone that's listening. It's just that I'd make it a little bit slower probably than usual. But anyways, so agreed this was better. It was a good and civil debate, better than Vegan Gains in AY debate. Well, look, just whatever. We can have some debates like this and some debates like that. We'll do. I'm never gonna get irritated at this guy. I mean, he's not irritating. He answers the questions to some extent, at least. And I think that's all you can. That's all I can ask for. Okay, so it was good and civil debate, better than 8 VG versus AY. We already read that. You probably should have spent more time on that, because a lot of people's joy and pleasure is derived from holocausting animals. Yeah, we could have. Well, fuck. Well, we could do that in the future. We could always talk about that in the future when he wants to do this again. So we just have to be, you guys were being pretty nice and everything. I just didn't know whether or not, when his microphone sounded like Darth Vader, I was like, what are you doing? I was joking around. I was like, are you doing the Steve Jobs thing? Because Steve Jobs used to, like, make his voice go really deep when he was trying to, like, dominate other people that he was talking to and shit. I was just joking around. I knew it wasn't really what was happening. Obviously, his microphone is messing up or whatever. So, I was being completely sincere. I thought that he was possibly, like, doing something like that, or just sounding like Darth Vader all of a sudden. So I just started when you probably should have spent more time. Well, we could do that in the future debate. He thinks there is something to gain from being born. Yeah, there's nothing to gain from being born. There's, he thinks that there's a mechanism by which you can gain something. He didn't seem to understand that you have 0 needs before being born. Yeah, well, he understood what the term neutral meant. So he just thought it was, he just kept. He was dipping and ducking and diving quite a few things, but I think overall anybody that was listening understands what I'm claiming. So, yeah, I think it went pretty well. What do you guys think? It could have gone. I could always go a little better or a little bit whatever. But look. We're just having the conversations, and that's the most fucking important thing. So we got to keep having the goddamn conversations. One way or another. I thought our conversation was all right. Am I going to debate? Ask yourself. Yeah, sure, I would do it if you'd want me to. Well, I tried to get him to understand, Danny Bork. Do you think I could have done better to try to get him to understand that you have 0 needs before you're being born? I was just claiming it was a neutral state. There's no way anyone is claiming that they want to be born. So it's a state of neutral. They, you know, they're not claiming they want to be born. They're not claiming they don't want to be born. They're just, so it's obviously completely up to the self whether or not you bring them in there. No, you were the logical one. Okay, well. Okay, good. I didn't understand what he was saying about the Buddhism thing initially, and that he didn't agree with the whole. He didn't know what asceticism meant, which I thought was weird because I mean that's what they do, like severe self-discipline and avoidance of all forms of indulgence, and they never really actually accomplish this all forms of indulgence thing. Typically for religious reasons, right? Like they practice religious asceticism. They practice, yoga every day in a certain way, kung fu every day in a certain way. This is what the monks do, the Buddhist monks. It's asceticism. So he didn't know what that was, and I didn't know what he was talking about with the edamamia or whatever. Edamame. Or the spiritual happy thing. I'd rather he didn't, LOL. But he invited you as far as I remember in the vegan gains debate at the end. Yeah, he did. Maybe you can go over the live chat comments of this video from start to finish. Yeah, why not? I mean, geez, that'd be a lot of comments though, right? There's a lot of comments here, wasn't there? Okay, it's actually not even allowing me to go back up all the way through them, so I'll have to go through them in another video. But was anybody claiming anything that was interesting? Or was it just all... Did you guys have to ban anybody? Or silence anyone? I hope not. Because, I mean, look, if they were being, like, just catastrophically rude, I mean, obviously, but... I'll just make my own channel so I can say it all there where it doesn't matter. I'd rather he didn't, LOL. I say some dumb shit sometimes. With what exactly? With what? What are you talking about, Neil? No, they were tolerable. Okay, well that's good. You could argue that when you don't come into existence, there is zero chance of suffering and death, and when you're being born, chance is greater than zero. Oh yeah, I did say, I sort of said that, but I don't like arguing this death thing is such a bad thing anymore, to be honest with you, because look, I mean, this suffering thing can really, 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 really get to levels that is just absurd, and quite frankly, death is preferable in a lot of instances. This prove that an antinatalist position is ultimately better in every circumstances. Well, look, I made that argument in the past, okay, and I do like that argument still. I don't think anyone's made any valid rebuttals towards even that argument that you're claiming right there, Aryan militarism. We'll just call you militarism. Oh, message was automatically held for review. Well, I didn't see what he fucking said, but whatever. Or you can go over them without recording a video. Oh, what was being claimed? Oh, well, fuck it. I mean, there's no reason to... you have to convince them that... Talk about wild animal suffering. What, they were claiming that there's no wild animals, that wild animal suffering isn't as bad as veganism, like he was trying to say? Like, I mean, there is no rational argument for that at all. Wild animal suffering is just catastrophically worse than anything that's ever happened because of human beings. Actually, you could argue that human beings, all the things that they cause have been as a result of their animal, stupidity, the animal, whatever, kingdom. They're just happening within the animal kingdom. But anyway, even if you try to separate them, bottom line is there's hundreds of trillions of animals that have died much more, 10 times more brutal deaths, 1,000 times more brutal deaths than any pig has died in any slaughterhouse. And believe me, I'm a vegan. I have been a vegan for 5 years. I've advocated for it on this channel. a lot and documented it. I didn't just lazily, do it. I'm not saying anybody else here is doing it lazily, but like, I mean, I documented the whole damn thing on this channel. Like from almost, very, very, very beginning, right? Talk about hold on, dogs. What was being claimed here? So, talk about wild animal suffering. So, you missed the debate, you guess. The other dude was trying to downplay WAS. Downplay WAS? You mean name the well-being? What do you mean was? Downplay was? Was? Huh? Well, watch the whole debate. Okay, problem solved. Oh, wild animal suffering. Yeah, he was to some extent, yeah. He was, at the beginning, he was trying to say that, he was trying to claim that, he thinks that there's an argument that they're actually causing billions of, like, more animals to suffer in like, the slaughterhouses and stuff than there are even in nature. And ultimately, nature has existed for 541 million years. And then also simultaneously, there's more suffering going on every day in nature than there is in the whole of animal agriculture by factors of trillions. Like, animal agriculture is happening, first off, within the animal kingdom. As a byproduct of it, not something that's completely separate. But even if you were to completely try to separate it, it's ultimately just something that is trivial compared. I mean, look, it's something worth fighting against. Okay, for sure. Like, it is definitely something worth fighting for. But I mean, wild animal suffering. Have you never watched Animal Planet, for fuck's sake? Like, these animals are their jaws get ripped off, and they walk around with a half of a jaw for, a couple months or years, and they're trying to drink water with half of a jaw, and then eventually they get horribly emaciated and they die slow and of infections and other types of disease. And nature's just, and that's just not happening in like, that type of brutality is happening, but it's rare in these animal Holocaust centers, places. People do brutalize them and stuff like that, and it's absolutely unacceptable, and that's why I'm a vegan. Because I don't find it acceptable at all, and there's just no point in which that's acceptable. Because it's just ridiculous. There's no reason to treat a animal like a commodity status business item when you don't have to consume their flesh and secretions to survive. So, but yeah, ultimately, animals in nature, specifically the animal kingdom, is the most catastrophic thing that has ever taken place. It's the worst thing that's ever happened, by far. Unimaginable suffering. Just think about being caught in a forest fire. If you were a deer, would you like to be caught in a forest fire? That happens to like millions of them every year. And it's been happening for the last 541 million years. That's just deer. And then that's, probably, and then billions of different types of animals in the wild as well. Also, there's much larger animals that there's millions of in the wild as well that are much more intelligent as well. If you want to take this into consideration, like they have more neurons as well. Like whales, for example. Whales have more neurons than than most humans per whale. Like a whale has more neurons, so very possibly a much higher selective pressure to feel pain than even human beings do. because of they're really shitty at reproducing, just like humans are. So they developed this pain thing a lot more than, for example, worms. Worms developed selective pressure for pain probably a lot lower because they reproduce far greater, and that's the only mechanism by which evolution operates, is whether you die or whether you reproduce. So, all right. Yep. It has nothing to do with fitness or anything like that for the crazy people claiming that I didn't understand what evolution was. That are like the 5%er people coming over from Vegan Gaines' channel. Oh, crazy people. Yep. Yeah, I mean, it's like, what do you think that cockroaches or ants are more fit than human beings? Because ants outnumber humans in biomass by probably 10, 20, 30, or 100 to 1. They definitely outnumber humans in biomass, so do you think they're more fit? Like, do you think an ant is more fit than a human? Obviously it's not, but these people just on my channel. But anyways, let's just summarize the debate. So, I mean, it went well. So, look, we already had our closing statements, so I'm going to head out now. You all have as least bad of an evening or afternoon or morning or whatever it is, wherever you are, and until next time, thank you for listening. Do you think VG is mentally ill? Look, no, I don't. I think he's just confused about this topic specifically. I think he's one of the more sane humans that I've ever come into contact with. Actually. He's definitely more sane than the Prophet Muhammad. Or than anybody that worships that. All right. Like, I wouldn't even want to be stuck in a room with somebody like that. I mean, to be honest with you, discussing that. You're just so inconsiderate, it's unbelievable. Maybe if it was recorded on the internet, maybe, I don't know. Probably even then, it's kind of sort of a waste of time. It's like talking to a brick wall. But compared to Vegan Gaines, so I'd prefer Vegan Gaines. All right, so to your name there, the Prophet Muhammad, make the Discord, damn it. Well, look, maybe. I mean, this is pretty damn good as like a communication mechanism between the people that are listening about this and the people that are not listening. I'd debate your prophet or whatever, totally cordially, by the way, if you'd like to do that. But look, I'm just saying, if you're asking whether or not I think Vegan Gaines is mentally ill, I think everyone ultimately has some form of like mental illness that they are toiling with. I think let me put it like this: there's different levels of crazy, and being the Prophet Muhammad and worshiping the Prophet Muhammad is one of the like highest levels of crazy you could possibly be emitting, like by far, based on just every standard you could hold for what somebody being crazy is. What, like being violent? That's it's totally sanctioned by the Quran. Like totally, it tells you that you can't even enter the kingdom of God practically if you don't perform it. So, or lie about people so that you do eventually achieve that state. So I mean, it's a very, very insane book, and yeah. So maybe I'm the only one. And if you want to look up lying in the Quran, it's just check out what's it called? Taqiyya. Okay, it's called Taqiyya in the Quran. Just Google like Taqiyya verses in the Quran. The Quran literally tells them to lie about their true motives so that they can gain ground. It's ridiculous. Once again, thanks for the debate, SHD. I hope everyone has a nice day. Yeah. All right. Again. All right. So last time I'm going to summarize this. You all have as least bad of an evening or afternoon or morning or whatever it is wherever you are. And until next time, thank you for listening.